No fire alarm test is planned, but should the fire alarm sound, please leave the room at your nearest exit and meet at the front of the grandstand. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak and stay seated while speaking. Please wait until a boom microphone is brought to you. You will not be heard on the live stream otherwise. Wear a mask at all times.
You are seated. Keep points short, and I ask members not to repeat points that have already been raised. And voting will be by a show of hands. Could we now have apologies for absence, please?
I've had apologies from Councillor Foden, Councillor J. Petherick, Councillor L. Petherick, Councillor Peart, Councillor Rolleston, Councillor Toome and Councillor Jenks.
Thank you, Sarah. Item 2, the minutes of the Annual Council, 28th of July 21. Could I have a proposer for those minutes being accepted? Councillor Connett propose. A seconder? Councillor Dewhurst. Could I have a show of hands? All in favour? That looks pretty well unanimous. Thank you. No. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay. Sorry about that. Can we raise your hands just so we can count, please? For your abstentions. Carried. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to go on to item 3, some announcements. Councillors, this is my first address to members of the Council since my inaugural speech at the Annual Council in May. I would like to introduce formally, although he's had to leave, my chaplain for the year, Father Nick Debney. He's the Vicar of St Luke's Church, Milburn. Welcome and thank you to him. During this year, my wife Jean will act as my consort, and my charity, which is very close to my family's hearts, is Alzheimer's Research. I believe that it's an important opportunity to take stock on the last 2 years. I want to thank my member colleagues for their work in communities throughout the pandemic and for supporting local organisations through funds like their locality and community funds to deliver vital services for some of the most vulnerable members of society. I have received nominations from some of the people who have gone above and beyond for their local communities, and I've written to them personally to thank them for their efforts. There is still an opportunity to nominate someone from a local community or voluntary sector organisation until next month. Support for residents, businesses and communities throughout the pandemic. It's been a big ask, but our frontline staff have been delivering services day in, day out. From the beginning of the pandemic, staff have stepped up to the roles, worked long hours. Initially, many were doing it from their dining tables or bedrooms to make sure people received vital support, grants, housing benefits, business loans, or helping people to come off the streets into safe housing. The leader and the managing director have asked me to announce that all staff will be given an additional day's leave this municipal year as a thank you. As a thank you for the hours and efforts they have put to help our communities, so that they can spend some extra time with their friends or their families, or simply a day to rest and recuperate. The pandemic has left an indelible impact on all our lives, and I recently raised a flag in the grounds of Old Ford House as a tribute to the emergency services who have been severely affected by it. In recognition of the impact of COVID across the district, the loss of life and the service provided by all in support of individuals and communities, we intend to establish a COVID memorial in the grounds of Old Ford House. Councillors, I know we all look forward to emerging from the recent stressful times, although I urge you all still to take care and precautions ongoing. Now, in respect of business today, due to importance of the Bradley Lane regeneration, I'm going to change the order of the agenda and bring forward items 12 to 15 to be taken after item 9. Then we will go back to complete the agenda with items 10 and 11. We'll now move on with the agenda. Item 4. Do we have any declarations of interest? Cannot see any hands raised. Appears none. Okay, now we move on to some public questions. And at the back of the room, I think there are some questioners. Firstly, I have questioner, it was questioner Madeleine, but it's been replaced by questioner Rebecca. Everyone's been given a response regarding this question from the leader. I would ask Rebecca if she has a supplementary she would like to ask. One supplementary per question.
Your answer to the first question that Madeleine, who I am advocating for, put in, the question was that you are aware of the Coronavirus Act requirement of 3 legal conditions to justify such a serious decision as locking down the Cambridge local economies and limiting freedom of the local citizens. She asked that you explain and justify with supporting evidence lockdown and lockdown restriction enforcement decisions made by the Teignbridge Council during the 2020 restrictions and up to the current date. You've answered that under direction to the Secretary of State, Teignbridge Council, along with other local authorities, has worked to support the communities, etc., and that the Council followed the professional safety and public health advice of those qualified and appointed to provide that guidance. You've also stated that in Devon, on matters of public health, we've been advised and supported by the Director of Public Health at Devon County Council, and you may feel it's more appropriate to submit your questions to the County Council. My first point is that as Teignbridge District Council, you serve Teignbridge constituents, and therefore this is a question for you, not Devon County Council. You are voted in as public servants for your constituents, and therefore passing the buck to Devon County Council is not really a satisfactory answer to this question. I have with me evidence of freedom of information requests that show that Teignbridge was one of the least affected areas in Great Britain, with the lowest number of infections and cases. I have written for freedom of information requests at the hospitals, and I was told by Derriford that the amount of people that died in 2020 of the coronavirus alone was 5 or less. You locked down the area on 5 or less deaths last year from the coronavirus. So I dispute that that is justification for what was done. Also, the directives that come from the government are recommendations, and they are directives. And you are asked as councillors to interpret those directives and to do what is appropriate in your area. And we do not think that it was appropriate to lock down the entire area on such low figures.
Could we have a response from Councillor Connett?
I thank the questioner for the supplementary. I'm not so light about 5 deaths as the questioner appears to be. We've provided a response to it. I believe the council has done all it could and should have done to protect the people of Teignbridge, to support our communities, our residents, our businesses. I make no apology for the work the council has done. I thank the staff and I thank all councillors for their support through the pandemic. It was the right thing to do, and I'm not ashamed of it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Connett. Can I remind questioners that we have a 15-minute time spell for these questions? Although I will be flexible, I would like to keep any supplementaries relatively short and to the point if you can. Your question 2. We have a response from the leader, which is as above. Have you a supplementary to that?
Question 2 was from July 2020 time when the Coronavirus Act allowed the councillors to take full responsibility over the health outbreak decision making at times of adapting the Coronavirus Act as necessary as an administrative tool to perform a councillor's duty. Have you been aware of the official government COVID-19 status dated March 2020, which clearly states COVID-19 was no longer considered a high consequence infectious disease in the UK? This was 4 days before we were put into lockdown. Are you aware that the COVID-19 status in March 2020 was no longer considered a high consequence infectious disease?
Yeah. Can I remind you that was your original question and a response has been given. Have you a supplementary to that?
No, that was not given. That is question 2. It's a separate question.
Chairman, I believe I've adequately responded to question 2. There are very many people who have been affected by COVID, both in district and across the country. I think the Council's done absolutely the right thing. It followed public health advice.
Excuse me, you have not answered the question. Were you aware that on March the 19th, 2020, that COVID-19 was categorised as no longer being considered as a high consequence infectious disease? You have not answered the question.
I've provided a response, Chairman. I have nothing further to add. It. The Council's done the right thing, Chairman.
Can we move on to question 3, please?
That is not an adequate answer. Question 3. Please explain how proposed council constitutional changes of excluding and limiting the residents from questioning the council performance could be justified under this councillor's 7 principle code of conduct and under contractual law, and by that I refer to the Nolan principles.
Right, we have a response from the leader. Now, have you a supplementary to that?
I want to know how you feel you have upheld the Nolan principles in the way that you have responded,
Councillor
and how that has affected your constituents. It's a very simple question.
Okay, the leader, Councillor Connaught.
Thank you, Chairman. The fact that the questioner is here today, as I put in a written question, has got a written response, is asking supplementaries, is the fact that we are following the Nolan principles. Many of us will have had correspondence from our residents and responded to that. I think the Council has done all it can and should have done. I think we do follow the Nolan principles, Chairman. Thank you.
Can we just talk about accountability then? Holders of public office
that
are accountable to the public for their decisions and actions,
Can I
and must
ask
submit
you
themselves
to stop
in
at this time?
scrutiny at the necessary time. You have not upheld your Nolan principles.
Excuse me, we're moving on. Councillor McGregor.
Well, please remember that we vote you in and that you are public servants, and by not answering questions you are failing to do your public duty.
Can I ask you to stop at this time?
You are not fit for office.
You have a comment, Councillor McGregor?
Thank you, Chair. It was just to add that we are accountable to the residents of the district, and every 4 or 5 years we stand accountable at the election box, and residents have a chance to judge us by our actions during the period of the administration each time there's a change of administration in the council. And I think it's fair to say that accountability can be determined at that point, and I think thank you very much for your patience on that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. We'll move on to questioner 2, and that is Amanda Rowe. Now, she's given a question and she has had a response, a written response from the leader. Does she have a supplementary?
You're just telling me that I've had my questions answered already? I haven't had them answered.
There is a written response. Have you not got a copy of the written response?
No. Who would have given that to me? I haven't had anything.
Just bear with me.
I sent them in. I haven't had a written response. I haven't had an answer. Yeah. But I'm here to ask questions, and you're here to answer them, aren't you?
A response has been given, a written response. It's there, given to you now, I believe, if you've not had it previously.
So it was given to me.
Right, if you'd like to
now.
ask the question, and the response is there in writing now, and then if you have a supplementary, could you please ask it?
So you've already answered my questions about half an hour ago, and I didn't know.
The written response has been given, and I presume you'd had a copy. But if that's not the case,
So is this how you do business then?
this is always how we
We
give a
had
written
to-
response to a question
All
you'd
right.
submitted.
So we
And
had
then-
to ask these questions 2 days before your meetings, and you answer them on the morning of the meeting. What, half an hour before this meeting, you've answered my questions? Not very fair, would you say?
Yeah. I'll pass you to the leader. Councillor Connett.
Thank you, Chairman. For very many years, residents have been able to ask questions of the council, but it's questions to the council at a council meeting. So the questions are submitted in advance, and we provide the written response at the meeting. And that would have been made available, and should have been made available to residents when they arrived. So the written question is set out for all councillors and members of the public. There's a written response from me, and of course the member of the public is entitled to ask a supplementary question.
And you render these questions, the answers to these questions at the last minute to me?
They're made available at 10 a.m. at the start of the meeting, yes.
So that is the
And
answer
that's-
to
that's
that is
quite
the
a-
response. And if you can formulate a supplementary at this time, then that's fine.
So if the questioner has a
fine.
supplementary, I'm happy to deal with it, Chairman, because there are a number of questions here, and I'm keen to get as many of the residents able to ask their questions as possible.
Oh, so it
If-
works-
if
it
Amanda-
works fine
if-
for you,
If Amanda
doesn't
Rowe
it?
doesn't have a supplementary, we
Then
can move to the next question.
We'll move on to the next question, please.
Right.
Have you a
Well,
supplement?
basically, my question was, what data and justifiable evidence for shutting all the businesses down? I don't know if you're aware of the people that have committed suicide, had depression. Wasn't it surely their choice? It's people's choice to go into shops, isn't it? They can go into all the big, essential, supposedly, shops. So why enforce smaller businesses to shut down when people surely have a freedom of choice to go in anyway?
So, Chairman, we would have,
Yes.
we would have worked within national guidelines. I don't think the council shut anything down other than operating within the national framework as part of the pandemic.
Well, I know shops were shut down.
Yeah.
It was supposedly
Yeah.
illegal, which isn't unlawful. And the Corona Act is only an act, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
We're
it's only
not
guidelines. So
in-
it's your decision to make people go bankrupt.
We're not into prolonged discussion on this. You have had a supplementary, and the leader's answered it. Could I ask to move on to the next
Yeah.
questioner, please?
So it's almost like a recorded answer you give people. It's not a from the heart answer or even from your data.
The questions are very similar, and
Yeah,
the leader has responded to those questions. Can I move on, please, to the next questioner? And that is Julie Ann Moran, please.
I really think that you need to read your data.
My question.
Supplementary questions, please. We've had, as I said, the written answer is there, so we need a supplementary to the written answer.
Well, all I can say is it is not acceptable.
That's your comment. That's no question, then, basically.
Well, it is. I mean, it seems like nobody has had their questions answered so far. Can I call my question out so everybody knows about it?
Yes.
The central government introduced the coronavirus as a temporary and limited flexible interpretation of existing constitutional regulations. This temporary guidance on how to deal with a health emergency, mainly executive councillors, to make a decision as to whether a lockdown is necessary and therefore the only option to keep residents safe during the outbreak. This decision could only be supplemented by local and national health and death data obtained by careful assessment with the residents. My question was, why was the decision to lock down Devon not discussed with the public before, as advised by the Transparency Act 2015 and justified with required evidence as advised under the Coronavirus Act, and as the last speaker said, we've only just had this response, and I don't agree with it. And the response from the leader was, under direction of the state...
Yeah, we've all got a copy of the response. Do you have any supplementary to that?
I just don't agree with it. I just think this is all wrong.
Can I pass
because
over?
You are not answering the questions.
I'll pass over to the leader for a response.
So I understand the questioner may not like the response, but the response sets out the facts of the matter, and that is a response. The council has done all that it could and should have done. In fact, our staff have worked very hard to get out the business grants to support businesses through the pandemic, and many businesses have actually been supported and sustained by the work of the council. I appreciate the question has a particular view. It is not one I agree with.
Well, I mean, you work for us, or we work, well, whatever. I just don't agree with it.
If there's no further questions, can we move on?
We can answer that. All of us were elected by residents, as Councillor McGregor said, elected by residents to serve and represent them.
I think you would have to be re-elected.
I'm elected by the people of Kenton with Starcross, and the questioner wants to come and stand in 2023 in May of that year in the election. She's more than welcome to. And she can put her case to the electorate if that's the issue. But at the moment,
it's what needs to be done now.
But at the moment,
not then.
At the moment, I am very proud of Team Bush District Council, its councillors, its members of staff, and all the work that we've done to support businesses and our communities throughout the pandemic.
Thank you.
Well, that's not satisfactory. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Leader. We have to move on. As I said, we've only 15 minutes, as I will be flexible, but the time is drawing on. So we have Corinne Cully. She has one question. I hope she's had time to read the response, and can she give us supplementary, please?
I have read your response. Unfortunately, I seem to have the generic reply that everybody else seems to have had to their questions, which is completely unsatisfactory. Teignbridge Council are independent from the County Council, and you just continuously pass the buck and expect me to now put my questions to the County Council. I wanted a response from you personally, and I don't now expect to have to go to County Council. You are individual people. I am guessing that most of you are parents or grandparents, and you should be caring about the lives of children. You should be looking deeper into the research of whether these vaccines for children should be going ahead. You are literally about to commit genocide to the young population by not thinking for yourselves.
I'm going to ask the Speaker to withdraw that disgusting remark. No one in this chamber is responsible for genocide. That was an outrageous insult to everyone.
Could you withdraw that question, please?
You need to do some research.
Could you withdraw?
Medical professionals have advised against this, and it's been ignored by the government.
So, Chairman, the response is this, actually. Teignbridge District Council is not an education authority, and we're not responsible for vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. That is a decision that sits with government, and it is an action that falls to the NHS and public health. We've tried to assist the questioners in getting the right authorities to answer the question. Many of us in this room will be parents and will take an individual view about whether we wish our 12 to 15-year-olds to be vaccinated or not. That is not, though, a question for Teignbridge District Council. I repeat again, I request the questioner to withdraw the disgusting remark made regarding genocide. Thank you, Chairman.
Are you prepared to withdraw that question?
You make decisions within the schools and the Education Board. It's not just the government. You can personally act on your own thoughts and advice, and you're not doing that.
I think we'll have to withdraw at this time. So can you please, we'll move on to the next questioner, please. Kim Angel. And can I stress, please, that we ask supplementary questions only and await the response from the leader, and when he gives the response, can we leave it at that, please?
No, we can't. I've waited a long time to be able to have my say, my thoughts. I represent quite a few people in the Newton Abbot district, and they have asked and been coming to me for a very long time. I've got tons and tons of emails, and I've been asked what's going on. So no, I won't skip. It's been a long process waiting to be heard. And as you know, people will only put up being ignored for so long. So I'm here as a peacekeeper to get and be acknowledged the information that I keep being asked. So I'm going to politely ask my questions, and I expect a verbal response, because this is being recorded publicly, is it not? There is no point me asking the questions, and because I have a piece of paper that I was given half an hour ago in response to my questions, the public will not hear your response to the questions that I put forward. So with your patience, your kindness, your generosity, I will ask the questions, and could you please respond so that the public can hear the response? My first question: during the lockdown months of 2020-2021, a number of the local services that should be provided by the council as contracted, we the residents haven't been provided, and others strictly limited. The residents, however, have been paying for their full council tax as stated in an original contract. Do you consider a refund as part of your COVID recovery plan?
Chairman,
Can I ask the leader to come in there?
Certainly, Chairman. I'd like to thank my colleagues on the Overview and Scrutiny Committees for their excellent work regarding the COVID recovery plan. That sets out in great detail what it is the Council is doing to support the economy and businesses and residents of Teignbridge. There is no refund on the council tax. Thank you, Chairman.
Your next question, please.
My next question is, what data, information do you use to justify advertising COVID hotspots in Newton Abbot and the Teignbridge area? And I would like to just point out one of the 7 principles that guides you as an elected public body. Number 2, integrity. Holders of public office must avoid placing themselves under any obligation to people or organisations that might try inappropriately to influence them in their work. They should not act or take decisions in order to gain financial or other material benefits for themselves, their family, or their friends. They must declare and resolve any interests and relationships.
Councillor Connett.
Chairman, we don't advertise COVID hotspots.
That's your answer. We do not advertise COVID hotspots.
We have seen the van with, it's a council van with the flash on the side with the lights on it that get switched on, driving around saying that we have a high incidence of COVID. Seen this, we've also got pictures of it.
Right, the leader.
Chairman, as I say, the council doesn't advertise COVID hotspots.
It's a council lorry.
Well, Chairman,
excuse me, the
Chairman,
leader is answering.
Are we to be interrupted? The council does not advertise COVID hotspots, Chairman. If the questioner has something different, then please email me the picture and I'll make further inquiries quite happily. However, there has been in the past a rise in COVID within the district, as many people will know, and been following the reports from Public Health England and Devon County Council's Public Health on that. So it would be a matter of fact. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Lee. Your final question, and can you please just, if there's any supplementary point you wish to make? But
no, I'm going to ask the third one because this has been publicly recorded and people will want to know my question and they will want to hear your answer because they cannot, unfortunately, see the answer that you gave me half an hour ago. Question 3. Who...
Can I just make a point to you? All the answers that have been given to you in writing are on the Teambridge website, so all members of the public can see this attached to the agenda. So everyone will be able to see them.
I'm asking for your patience. I'm asking for your courtesy to allow me to ask my question and your reply.
Could you please ask it then, please?
Number 3, what company provides you with above-mentioned data information? The data information of the rising COVID in Newton Abbot and Teambridge area. Who advises you on that data that we have numbers rising?
Right, so that's your final question. Can I pass to the leader, please?
So we will receive information from Devon County Council, Public Health England, Chairman. Thank you.
There we are. That's the answers. Can I ask, we now move on?
No, I didn't get you gave everybody else a chance to do the one off the cuff one, and I'd like to do that in reply to your last question. You obviously know who Steve Brown is. He's the Devon's Director of Public Health. And he said, and I quote, "Coronavirus is still with us, and while case rates in Devon have fallen in recent weeks, they are likely to rise," unquote. This was posted on the 14th of September, 7 days ago, 2021, posted in Community Devon County Council homepage, Devon County Council. So how can numbers have risen in such a short time as to be out there promoting and advertising for people to get vaccinated by an untested, no long-term adverse effects reports? Why are you still promoting the vaccine?
Could I ask Councillor Heaton, you have a point.
It's dangerous to say what's just been said. This vaccine has been tested and it has had data published about it, and we have to rely on experts. My father used to say he wouldn't drink the beer from a landlord who wouldn't drink his own beer. All my medical friends and all the specialists and scientists that I know couldn't wait to vaccinate themselves and now their children. And I think we should put an end to this conversation because it's not...
It is an emergency.
Can I ask you, please, to cease now? I want the leader to make a final comment on those questions, and that is the end of your questions.
Vaccine. It is unproven
Chairman,
side effects.
I'm well aware that the questioners are seeking...
It is not...
Can I ask you, please, to cease?
2023, that is...
Can we turn the microphone off, please?
Chairman, I'm well aware that the questioners are seeking to use the fact that we're broadcasting a meeting to peddle their particular views about coronavirus. I have no truck with that. I'm grateful to Councillor Eden for that intervention regarding the work that's been done. It's an individual matter whether people choose to be vaccinated or not. I think those that have done the right thing. I respect the decision for those that have chosen not to. That's a matter for them. But I'm equally satisfied that there is a pandemic, there is a COVID and coronavirus, and we have taken the right actions to support our residents and our communities and our businesses.
Can I please ask you to sit down, please?
And in that, Chairman...
Please, can you be quiet, please? Thank you.
So thank you, Chairman. I understand the question's point of view. I disagree with it entirely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Leader. Right, we have now got two questions which have had written responses from Sarah N. and Lisa Goody. Neither of these are here today, I do not believe, so we will move on to Mia Stasted, if I pronounced that. I apologise if I haven't. She has three questions, or three supplementary questions, please. Is she here? She's had to leave early. Fine. Okay, thank you. That brings the end of questions from members of the public. Thank you very much. And I was a bit lenient with going on a little bit longer there because I did try to help you put your questions, but I'm afraid we went on quite a bit longer than we normally do. Yes, Councillor Jeffrey, is it?
Just to say I've lost my Wi-Fi somewhere. I've lost the Wi-Fi.
Sorry, have you a question, Councillor Jeffrey? Oh, okay, sorry about that. Right. Now then, we're going to move on to item 6, which is councillor questions. And first of all, we have 2 questions, and the first of those from Councillor Eden.
Hello. Yes, so I've read the answer from Councillor Dewhurst, and my question was about how confident is Councillor Dewhurst about the district's recycling not being exported to third country locations, and he sent me to a website link. I actually asked him how confident he was, so can he actually answer the question for me, please?
Councillor Dewhurst.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am very confident. I sent you to the website because, as I know you know, Councillor Eden, I'm very keen that all our members are aware of what is on our website and the useful information that's there. And on that particular link, it tells you where all our materials are going. And as I say, I'm very confident that they're going to those places. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Eden, you have another question?
Yes, thank
supplementary?
you. So my second question was about what checks and confirmations can be provided that show beyond reasonable doubt that recycling collected across Teambridge from responsible householders is actually 100% processed and 100% recycled. I do have a response from Councillor Dewhurst, and it's not very quantitative. He talks about the vast majority, and I'm wondering what data led him to say vast majority. And then he says we have a statutory duty to quantify. I'm quite right. And quantify means measuring. It means actual hard data. It doesn't mean guessing. So I'm hoping he can actually do what he said he's going to do and actually quantify it and define what majority means. And then he says again how confident he is. He says he's very confident that we're taking necessary steps. So I'd like to know what he means by vast majority.
Councillor Dewhurst.
I thank Councillor Eden for her question, and the response was that the vast majority does in fact remain in the UK. I can't quantify it here, but I will get a written response as to the percentage that does remain in the UK. There is a small quantity of cardboard that goes to Germany at the moment, and we have never said that all our recycling remains in the UK. I am confident that this is what happens because almost the very first question I asked when I became executive member for recycling, household waste and environmental health is what happens to our waste, and can I be assured that none ends up in places like Asia and the Far East where it's not recycled in good conditions. And I was shown how the system works with checks by Devon County Council and also the Environment Agency. So I am confident. I am confident in our officers who do an amazing job and have done an amazing job throughout this pandemic when quantities of recycling and waste, residual waste, have increased dramatically. And as such, we're sort of operating in Christmas conditions at the moment. So that's why I can't tell you what the vast majority specifically is in tonnages, But I'll get you that in due course, Councillor Eden. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dewhurst. Councillor Eden?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, but I do think that we should be better prepared, and you have had some time for that question. And to use words like vast majority and very confident, does vast majority mean 70%, 60%, 80%, 90%? I want data, and the public deserve figures, not airy-fairy phrases.
I think Councillor Dewhurst has given his answer to that, so he's going to provide further information at a later date, so thank you. You have a further question, do?
Not for Councillor Dewhurst.
Not for Councillor Dewhurst, but you have further question for someone else?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So do we go to the next ones then?
Yes, carry on.
Well, all I wanted to say, I just wanted to ask Councillor Wrigley to make sure he doesn't stop providing such excellent information. He gave me proper data, proper answers, and I think some of his colleagues could take a few lessons from him.
Oh, okay. Do you have a response to that, Councillor Wrigley?
Thank you very much. Never to do so, thank you very much. This is an important issue, and we are very much aware of the horrific state that you can get into, the horrific state of being homeless, and it is horrible. And we are doing everything that we possibly can to prevent that for as many people as we can, and we are continuing our efforts as we go through. And we're very much keeping an eye on it with the ridiculous idea of removing the £20 a week uplift in universal credit, which would be a disaster for so many families in the area, combined with the increase in heating costs and the level of inflation we have at the moment. So we are very closely monitoring the impending storm that we anticipate.
Councillor Eden, is to have another question, or is it linked with that question?
Not to Martin's, no. But I did have a question related to the next one, which was about, which is for about Airbnb. Should I go on to that one? I'm getting confused. Sorry. I don't have any more questions for Martin. For Councillor Wrigley.
Just bear with me. Okay, we'll move on. I think Councillor Jeffries had a question. Oh. Yes, yes, that's your question, Councillor Eden, and Councillor Jeffries is mentioned.
I don't have any supplementary.
No supplementary to that,
No,
fine.
Not for Councillor Jeffries. It's all clear.
Not from the leader, that's fine. I think we now move on to a question from Councillor Malone. At the back. I don't mind which one of you. Councillor Malone, do you have a supplementary to the response you've been given?
Yeah, I thank the councillor for his response. It sadly was more flannel than we had in the 1970s. It was a long time ago now, so I'll remind members of that the planning meeting of January 21st, 2020 was rather a contentious one, and after a while a planning advisory service group was charged with investigating irregularities within it. It returned a verdict of nothing to see, though almost all our concerns were unaddressed. Chief among these was our frustration that in a massive decision that turned on the chairman's casting vote...
Can I just interrupt, Councillor Malone? Can I ask you not to handle the microphone if that's possible?
Well, otherwise I'm not speaking into it properly, am I?
Just get the boom, the gentleman to hold the boom in front of you, if that's possible.
Yeah, it's being stuck into my nose, which is uncomfortable, so I'll just hold it like this if that's all right with you. The 2 speaking slots against development were allocated not to concerned locals or their advocates, but to persons unknown who have since become known as the ghost objectors, and who have always been kept secret from us and the public. My supplementary question hinges on this. We know who the objectors were, we always knew, but it took 18 months to gather the evidence and the documents. The first objector slot was given to a 23-year-old male described by a former employer as having learning difficulties, who is on record as saying that he was encouraged to write a letter of objection by a friend of his mother, a person who worked for TDC in the planning department. The letter was received before the application was even validated and was selected by TDC from the 100 or so received. He was a farm labourer whose previous employer was one Anthony Rue, the farmer and chief landowner of the NA3 development. The letter he wrote was a poetic entreaty. He did not object on planning grounds. It was not an objection that was admissible under TDC guidelines. He does not live in Tinbridge, but on a still under construction development in Paynton, in a family house that was entirely owned by Linden Homes. Prior to the planning meeting, he was telephoned by a council officer in Ford House who solicited him to be a speaking objector, along with his brother, a second objector, even though his brother had made no objection, written no letter, and had no interest in the issue. Thus were these spots, so precious to the other side of the argument, filled by TDC. It appears neither of them, contrary to what we were told, suffered a bereavement on the morning of the January 21st that prevented them coming. They simply didn't come. We have asked many times for full disclosure on the ghost objectors and have been advised that the withholding of this information under GDPR is a misrepresentation of what GDPR is for. We asked the executive member for planning to be honest with us several times under Part 2 conditions. We got silence. We have exhausted every official, polite, courteous and reasonable avenue and got nothing but obstruction and contempt. So now this is happening. Due to this straw manning, Abbots Kerswell Parish Council and the Walborough Residents Association were unable to bring their expert from Oxford to put forward a scholarly environmental case for the planning committee to hear. The speaking slots were knowingly misallocated by TDC officers breaching their own rules in a deliberate attempt to disadvantage the case against adoption of the proposal. The planning committee was lied to. The leadership of this council has committed, at the very least, conspiracy to defraud the residents.
Can I ask you, Councillor Malone,
by the willful and deliberate prejudice.
Is there going to be a question, please?
You are in contempt of the law and in contempt of the people. So can the chairman...
Can you please sit down, Councillor Malone? Please, Councillor Malone, can you sit down, please? Can you please sit down? And if you have a supplement, please. I think please do adjourn.
Chairman, if Councillor Malone would like to provide the evidence that seemingly me and my colleagues have never seen or heard, then perhaps that would help. Or we can adjourn the meeting, Chairman.
Please. We're going to start live streaming again in just a second. Right. Thank you, councillors. I am going to now pass over to the company's solicitor, Paul Woodhead, for a statement.
Thank you, Chair. Members and all present will have just witnessed the events of a few minutes ago and heard the allegations made, and I'm sure would appreciate that no one here is in a position to comment further in respect of what was said at this time, and indeed it perhaps would be inappropriate to do so in any event. The councillor who's raised those issues is invited to meet with me and or to provide me with the information that he has alluded to and made reference to, whereupon it will be properly considered and investigated as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I would just say that if we can continue this meeting now with a sense of decorum, and I don't want any more further outbursts from anyone, otherwise we will have to suspend the meeting again. So if we can continue in a sensible manner, please. And I'm going to pass over now to the next questioner, which will be Councillor Dawes, who's got 3 questions, and I could ask him to give a supplementary to each question.
Thank you. Yes, I do have a supplementary to my first question, which was, did TDC, Tinbridge District Council, reply to their letter from Klein Earth of the 2nd of September 2019, which outlined the council's legal obligations in terms of climate change. I've been given a response which suggests that though they didn't reply, the council is implementing the obligations within its local plan. the issue with that is that it's more rhetoric and less action. And it's a shame that the high watermark that it appears to aspire to stays in that realm of rhetoric. The scrapping of the Walborough DPD, which should have been put in place for the protections of the highly sensitive NA3, is a very poor example of that planning, having wasted £100,000 worth of taxpayer funds. I know the leader was very upset about the accusation of genocide. Well, the council is certainly guilty of environmental genocide, and I think that will remain a matter of fact. We would like the executive to be judged on their actions in the fullness of time. My second question...
Okay, can I just take one at a time, if that's possible?
Yes, sure.
Okay, could I have an answer from the portfolio holder, Councillor Hook?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the question. As stated in the answer, the letter was constructed but not sent due to PERDA. We were approaching a general election at that point. Surely it's important here that we took on board the content of their letter, which of course had in fact always been our intent. The Local Plan Working Group, of which Richard is a member, Councillor Dawes, met several times to construct carbon reduction policies, at which Councillor Dawes had the opportunity with others to check whether a reply to Client Earth letter had been sent post-election. Planners have taken on board a variety of comments from the public, ACT, the University of Exeter, Client Earth and others to come up with a robust and comprehensive set of carbon neutral policies that will be demanding of future planning applicants. There's really no need for this to be confrontational. I've never wanted to be our action on climate to be confrontational. I have a long-standing constructive dialogue with a range of climate activists and environmental pressure groups, local and national. I'm confident that the Council is aware of its legal obligations with regards to climate change. And although I don't believe Client Earth have made contact with the Council again since 2019, I'm very happy to re-establish contact and hopefully have a constructive dialogue with them to help better understand how the Council can support our district reaching its carbon neutral target. We've always said we can't do this alone as a Council, and we will all need to work together, and I'm very happy to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Councillor Dawes, have you a supplementary to your second question?
Yes, so my second question was asking the Teambridge District Council to make public its response to the letter from Buxton's Environmental that, again, outlines the legal obligation the Council still holds in respect of any environmental and climate change obligations in relation to NA3 sites. The solicitors Buxton Environmental wrote to TDC to ask if they were aware that the obligations remained. The public can be forgiven to think that full planning permission has been granted for NA3. The overwhelming issues remain. These are large environmental and all the climate change concerns, and they have to be addressed. They should sensibly have been addressed in the master plan for NA3, the DPD, that this executive cancelled. If the Council is at all committed to environmental protections, it should reinstate a master plan for NA3 with oversight from members and transparency to the residents, rather than deal piecemeal with the numerous applications. So will the portfolio holder commit to replying to the letter and reinstating the master plan for the whole site, rather than giving developers the upper hand dealing with each and every application piecemeal?
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you for the question, and no, we won't be responding to the letter. Thank you.
And a supplementary to your third question, Councillor Dawes.
Yes, my third question was whether the conflicts of interest were outlined in relation to the Planning Advisory Service investigation into the Langford Bridge investigation. The answer to the question is that the chair of the planning committee did declare that he'd worked for the Planning Advisory Service at the meeting where the council committed to invite the Planning Advisory Service in. So that's one declaration. of many meetings. In the single call that we had with the Planning Advisory Service, it became quickly apparent that the officer in charge of the investigation, Richard Crawley, had a professional working relationship with the Chair of Planning under investigation. It would have been wholly proper due process that was declared throughout the investigation. Members have been consistently hoodwinked and treated with contempt. Members have voted in good faith by the representatives to make decisions and offer scrutiny. The Planning Advisory Service failed to address the 7 huge concerns against the planning decision for Langford Bridge, and in doing so may well have conspired to defraud the residents of Teambridge and their failures to follow due process in investigating this meeting. The leadership of this council has committed, at the very least, conspiracy to defraud the residents of Teambridge by willfully and deliberately prejudicing an open and fair planning meeting. The ghost objectors alluded to by Councillor Malone were questioned on the 4 o'clock on the 21st of January 2020, and since that date the council
can I ask, is there a question coming?
The council have been withholding.
It certainly is not. Bearing in mind the comments the solicitor has just made, have you got a question, a direct question, Councillor
Yes, I have.
Dawes?
Can the Chair of Planning Committee offer an explanation as to why he didn't declare his professional working relationship with the lead investigating officer at any junction throughout the council meetings of the investigation into Langford Bridge?
Councillor Taylor?
It's a question, thank you, Chair. It's a question for members regarding declaring an interest, and that's not something that I can comment on, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Right. Questions have come from the portfolio holder, and that is where we end this matter. We'll go on to the next question, which is from Councillor Purser. Over to the left, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just perhaps highlights the breadth of things that district councillors have to deal with. I and my constituents would like to thank the leader for the response and look forward to the amendments being made by the end of October. I have no further supplementary question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Purser. Now we have some questions from Councillor Patch. Wherever he is.
Yep, I've got the microphone
You've
now.
got oh, sorry, couldn't see you.
That's okay.
Supplementaries, please.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. My first question asked whether the document purporting to be the constitution of this council had been properly scrutinised to assess, record and present to members all of the material changes in the document compared to the previous version of the constitution to have been properly adopted. I did not receive an answer to that, unfortunately, although I believe it's quite apparent that it has not been so scrutinised. My supplementary question: who gave explicit authorisation late last year for the removal from the council website of its adopted constitution and its replacement with an unadopted document, and who was consulted on this and or had knowledge at the time that it was being done?
Going to pass to the leader, Councillor Connett.
I'll just wait for the engine to
Just
pass.
wait for the engine.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful to Councillor Patch for the questions on the Constitution. I don't agree with his premise about how this started out. So Council authorised the solicitor to amend and update the Constitution, which was done. To my satisfaction, we have a current and valid Constitution. The question that Councillor Patch puts more generally is, how did we come about with that? And that's why the Council, when it recognised, actually, but it's been operating for very many years, but didn't have a formal procedure for actually reporting these things two members set up the Procedures Committee, and that's met, and we're going to discuss that as an item on today's council agenda. So that speaks to the fact that points have been raised, members have taken that into account, changed the way the council's working, and the constitution is being looked at. But we need a constitution that the council can work by, and I think council is satisfied, or should be satisfied, that it gave an instruction to the council solicitor to update and amend the constitution, which was done, and that's the one we're working from until such time as the council looks again, the councils look again, to consider what further amendments or changes it might like, or whether it wish to revert to wording that was used in the earlier edition of the Constitution, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. You have second question, Councillor Patch, and a supplementary, please.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, I don't want to preempt too much of the debate that will take place under this item, but just to come back on something that the Leader mentioned, the process for putting this new document in place. Councillors were given assurance at the time that authority was given, delegated authority, to update the Constitution. There would not be significant material changes. As my original motion has set out in some detail, there are significant material changes to the detriment of the rights of members of the public to scrutinise the Council, and to the detriment of members of this Council to scrutinise the Council. These changes have not been scrutinised. Just moving on to question 2 then.
Just bear with us, to the Leader.
I had taken what Councillor Patch said to be the supplementary for question 2.
Yes, I thought that was...
That's not, no, that I was actually coming back on to clarify a point.
Can we just have a supplementary, please?
Yes, I'm coming to that now. Question 2, the supplementary, concerns the language used in the recommendations to reaffirming the document. And my supplementary question is it lawful or legally sufficient to reaffirm an unadopted document as the Constitution of this Council for it actually to become the Constitution of this Council? I would recommend an answer to this be found before we reach item 8 on today's agenda.
Councillor Connett.
So again, Chairman, I understand what Councillor Patch is seeking to achieve in the sense of, do we have a lawful constitution? I don't agree with his understanding and interpretations of it, and that the council authorised the solicitor to modernise, amend, update, which was done, and we have that. Councillor Patch says there have been substantial changes which go beyond minor amendments. That's his view, and we've set up a procedure to look at that. So we've got procedure, and that comes up in the next part of it. I'm satisfied, and other members may well be satisfied, that we are operating from a valid constitution. And the Procedures Committee chose the word reaffirm as in to say, yes, the November 2020 edition, the modernised, updated edition, is the one that we are working from. And I think we are getting torn over whether we use reaffirm, confirm, reconfirm, when that's actually not necessary. What we're trying to do is understand the points that Councillor Patch has been making, set up a system to deal with it, and it's a piece of work that is ongoing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. And the final supplementary, please, Councillor Patch.
Thank you. Well, I just to say that document has never been affirmed, adopted at all before, so I don't see how it can be reaffirmed or re-adopted. In any case, question 3, I asked about the recommendations for changes to the planning committee and operation planning procedures, and whether this had come from a proper review of any sort. So my supplementary question: has the Council, within the last 18 months, received any formal complaints about planning procedures at the Council, or any complaints against officers of this Council with regard to planning procedures and determination of planning applications at this Council? And if so, have any such complaints been formally investigated?
The Leader.
Thank you. I'm not able to answer that now, but I'm happy to provide a written response via the members' newsletter. What I would say, of course, is that the recommendations which appear in the Council's agenda today come from a piece of work arising from a standards committee hearing and then consideration made up procedures, which are presented to members today for their consideration to vote for or against as they wish. But that is being the journey of the procedures that are, or the recommendations before Council today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. Right, we now move on to the next question, and a supplementary, please, from Councillor Malone.
Yeah, I presume this is my question about the new revised working times.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I thank you for your answer. Frankly, it's just not good enough. I mean, apart from everything else that's going on here, you're laying the council wide open for civil actions under basic human rights legislation, because you're removing the democratic representation of every citizen whose elected representative cares for a family or a relative or who works for a living. I appreciate that you've pointed me towards the public purse on this. There's money available to get carers in. I have a child with special needs. I can't just leave him with anyone who happens to be available, just so that I can serve my constituents. This new working times is written on the assumption that all councillors are old, retired, and blessed with limitless time. And I tell you what really winds me up and what forms my supplementary, okay? If any of my group misses a single meeting, the deputy leader goads them on Facebook like a 12-year-old and tells the Abbots Kurzweil page how awful we are. So if we cannot go to meetings because maybe like me, we have 3 children or people with special needs to look after, is he going to sit in his empty nest with all the time in the world and carry on crowing that we're not representing our electorate while his own executive has deliberately made that impossible for us?
Thank you, Councillor Malone. I will answer this. I can assure you, Councillor Malone, that this decision was taken in conjunction with the views of all the chairs of the committees. There was never going to be one perfect answer. It was never aimed at excluding any individual councillor. The decarbonisation of Ford House was and is a priority. To carry on with the existing timetable of meetings was going to cause interruption and delay to the work which had to be carried out, and also difficulties for those attending meetings. As the work is designed to commence in December of this year, and hopefully be completed by March, although that can be not guaranteed, we are talking a very limited time period. There was never going to be a precise answer to this situation. It's just something we had to do to progress the work as soon as we possibly could. So I'm sorry, that is the answer, and we had never intended to...
Doesn't actually answer the question, which was, is Councillor Dewhurst going to stop goading us if we have to look after our kids rather than turn up at a meeting?
I don't think that's a relevant question, Councillor.
I think it's a very relevant question. I'll rephrase it. Is he going to grow up?
Certainly not when that's going to be answered. I hope we can continue this in a civil manner, please. Thank you. That's the answer to that question. Now Councillor Eden?
Thank you. Yes, just a small comment that 4 o'clock is really a dreadful time to pick, because if you've got children to pick up from school, you've got to get there, you've got to get back, you've got tea, and I do wish there'd been, maybe I missed an email, but I do wish there'd been more of a consultation, because for a lot of us actually a start at 6 would be awful lot better. 4 is the worst possible time. You're doing your kids' tea, you're picking them up, it's hopeless. It's going to be very difficult for me and any other working parent, I imagine, to meet 4 o'clock.
I repeat a lot what I said to Councillor Malone. There was never going to be a precise answer. If there is a desire from councillors to move it to a later time, at say 6 p.m, then that is certainly something that can be considered. It's not to make it difficult for councillors. This is not an exact science, so we're just trying to get the work completed. And it's so difficult. We're never going to please everyone. So if there's a desire to move to 6 o'clock, then that's something we could possibly do. But that's something that would have to be decided after this meeting, obviously. Okay? Thank you. We've got another question. Oh, we've got a hand up there somewhere. I can't see who it is from here, but... Councillor Parker-Conn.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the last 2 speakers, and I just wanted to ask whether consideration for councillors with caring responsibilities have been consulted on more broadly, and whether we could have that broader consultation where we ask councillors more widely, and perhaps consider using things like Old Ford House as an alternative venue for some of those smaller meetings where we could feasibly socially distance there and be far enough away from the works going on. So it would be useful to have a broader consultation, please.
I'll pass over to the Managing Director for an answer there.
Thank you, Chairman. The answer to that is, of course, we will consider that. We've been looking at the requirements in terms of coronavirus and what we need for distancing, and we've been taking advice from the environmental health officer and the health and safety officer who are very well qualified to be able to give comment on this. Our primary concern is to keep officers and councillors safe. We're trying to get the timings right so that we can use that. If we can use Old Ford House, we will have 10 o'clock meetings. If we need to come off-site, we will have to come off-site. Currently, we are unaware of where we'll be holding the 2 council meetings. So over that period, it looks like O&S committees and planning and full council are going to be the issues. We hope that we could try and do that in Old Ford House, but we're still waiting for guidance in terms of health and safety with that. What we were trying to give is notice to those of you who work, who may be able to flex as well. So the actual council chamber will be unable to be used because of the amount of drilling works that are going on in ceilings and floors, and it just would be impractical to hold a meeting. What we had is an agreement from the contractors that we were talking to, that they would be able to finish at before 4 o'clock on the days when we're having meetings. So yes is the answer to that. We will try and move meetings over to Old Ford House where it's safe to do so and where we can gain access, because obviously there's issues with streaming those meetings, especially if they're planning. We've got issues with hearing loops, and there's a disability discrimination issues of trying to get people up and down stairs with no lift. So unless we have every meeting off-site, and this meeting is probably costing the best part of £2,000 here today, unless we hold all of the meetings off-site to be safe, then there is a significant issue for us. But we'll try and do what we can, Councillor Parker Khan, to accommodate those meetings in Old Ford House and those at different times. But yeah, we were just trying to safeguard people who who work, and I know there's a number of councillors who work, to be able to put stuff in their diaries to know what was happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Managing Director. I think there was another hand up. Yes, Councillor Patch.
Thank you. Thank you. Briefly, yes, I had intended to make the same point as Councillor Parker Khan. I would hope that meetings can be held in Old Ford House. The one meeting, I think, which might be very large is the full council meeting, obviously. And since we appear to be meeting once every 4 months, they're not that frequent. I would hope that we can have an arrangement such that the drilling would stop for the next full council meeting, and then whether it's 2 months or 4 months after that when we have another full council meeting. Just also, for reference, there are no legal requirements now on social distancing, so I don't see as why that should be a barrier in terms of the size of the meetings we have.
Thank you, Councillor Patch. Yes.
Sorry, can I come back? There is, under our health and safety obligations to staff and councillors, so whilst there might not be in terms of your legislation, my duty to my staff and to you is to try and safeguard you as best we can, and that's what we're working to. It's not to do with coronavirus social distancing stuff. It's the health and safety regulations I have that would come under. So if you want to email David Eaton, Paul Nichols and John Paul Bove. Thank you.
Thank you, Managing Director. Right, we're... oh, sorry, I do apologise. Councillor Russell.
Thank you. For the last 12 months, we've managed perfectly well using Zoom. Is there no reason why we can't use Zoom in these circumstances? Thank you.
I think the legislation precludes us from doing that, unfortunately. Yeah, not really any more we can say on that, really. Councillor McGregor, is that an answer for you? Sorry, it's not the ideal one, but okay. Councillor McGregor?
That should be the end of that. However, I note that Councillor Cook is starting to wrap her coat round her, and wonder if it might be better to move her away from the windows where the drafts are.
Well, we can certainly consider that. Is that possible? No comments like that, please, Councillor Malone. Yeah. Are you okay there, Councillor Cook? Yes, she's okay, I think. So, right, we have another set of questions. Thanks for waiting. Councillor Bullivant, I think you have 3 questions. Supplementaries? 4? Oh, right.
I recognise how time is flowing by, so I'll be as brief as I possibly
Sorry,
can.
I can't count.
Neither can the person in the first question. There are 7 social rented properties, not 8 as listed. Delivering social homes or homes for those people that need them, given that we've got 1,000 families in Teambridge on our waiting lists. It's extremely important that our focus is on how we provide homes for these people, and I'm delighted to see this as a start on this process. So thank you for the detail that's given an answer to question 1. In terms of question 2, the size of each property, I note that the sizes here are just above the statutory limits for the type of accommodation that's been provided. What is a concern for me here, however, is recognising in our capital budgets the amount of money that's being spent on each of these properties. It works out to be just less than £3,000 per square metre of construction cost. The specification for these houses is obviously set at a very high standard. My concern is that the open market currently in Newton Abbot, house prices available on the market for new builds would suggest that the price paid for the construction of these 7 properties is significantly higher by £1,000 per square metre than those properties that would normally be available on the free market. If one looks at the specifications for these houses, which are extremely high for the right reasons, if one looks at the work that Mid-Devon County Council are doing in providing almost identical properties, they are actually achieving a price which is £500 a square metre less than we have paid for these properties. My point being is that we've received money from the government, we've received monies from S106 that is rightly being directed in towards providing social or affordable homes, and that it is our duty as a council to make sure that the maximum value is extracted. And therefore, we could have, instead of providing homes for 7 families, provided homes for between 12 and 14. So there are 5 or 6 families out there that could have had homes, new homes, that haven't got them. Can I have the assurance, please, from the officers, from the executive, I should say, that in future they will take due regard of the economics of providing this type of facility and make sure that we maximise the number of homes that we're providing for the community? Thank you.
Right. The answer to that, Councillor Wrigley.
Thank you for the question, and yes, I too am delighted to see the start of the social housing building programme that we are doing. I'd like to remind Councillor Bullivant that these are not equivalent homes that you would find on the open market. Certainly the first 2 at Drake Road have been specially built to accommodate children with extra needs, and they are fully wheelchair accessible, and you will see a whole range of facilities in there. They're also built on brownfield sites, and they are built on a site that the previous administration failed to find anybody interested in buying or doing anything with. We have delivered new homes on that site. We've done it with grant money, with money from the government, and we've done it effectively. We will go on and build more, and we are always looking at value for money, and each of these projects is costed out and estimated and gives the appropriate return on the project. So I'm proud to have delivered what we've delivered so far, and I'm proud that we have a lot more in the pipeline, and we will hopefully be announcing more in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor Wrigley. Councillor Bullivant, you have back up to here again, please.
Thank you for the clarification about the fact that social homes or affordable homes do not attract SIL or S106 payments. So I have no further questions relative to question 3. But question 4, an important step for anybody entering the homes market is access to homes. Effectively, SIL payments have become a tax on new home building. And if you look at the numbers down here, had these houses attracted SIL payments, people entering the market would have had an effective tax on them of almost £10,000 per property. My question to the executive, therefore, is recognising our common wish for people to have homes, is it right that we have put on the cost of a house this level of tax, and should we therefore be looking at how we use SIL and S106 and look at how we try and recover monies from these people when we're at a time when house prices are escalating and house prices are becoming increasingly unaffordable? These taxes represent almost 15% of a current starter home. So could I ask the executive if they're prepared to look at the mechanism, how we charge SIL, and how it can be adapted to make sure that buying your first home is more affordable for those that wish to buy them. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Wrigley.
A slightly peculiar question. Most of the structure of the planning and the construction industry is set by central government. We are bound by what they set up and the way this is currently put together. There is much that I would like to change, but to do that we need to change the government and their view of planning and house building. It is government policies that is putting the prices of houses up. It is government actions that we are trying to get around by building more social housing, and so I'm not sure that there is anything really there for us to look at. Thank you.
Councillor Eden.
Thank you. Councillor Bullivant uses the word tax as though it's a swear word. I would actually say we should be celebrating what taxation brings us. It brings to our communities. It pays for our schools, our healthcare. It pays for all the things that we all want as a community. So, Councillor Bullivant, I think you should try putting more warmth into the word when you say tax.
Thank you, Councillor Eden. Right, if there's no more questions, no more councillor questions, we will now move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is recommendations from committees to full council. And item 7 is to be presented by Councillor Taylor, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, item 7 on today's agenda is the recommendation from our executive made at the meeting of 16th of September last week, which seeks the formal agreement of full council for matters relating to the scope, resourcing, timetable and governance arrangements towards the preparation of the non-statutory joint strategy for East Devon, Exeter, Mid Devon and Teignbridge councils. In January this year, having considered the benefits and options for continued joint plan making following a formal withdrawal from the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan, full council resolved in principle to the preparation of a non-statutory joint strategy plan for our area in partnership with East Devon, Mid Devon and Exeter City Councils, with the support also of Devon County Council. Post-GESP, such a joint strategy would continue to provide an effective methodology towards overarching planning policies such as climate change mitigation and environmental protection, while at the same time helping fulfil the national planning policy framework requirement under a duty of cooperation. This in-principle resolution was also made by the relevant committees of each of the other 4 partner authorities, with details relating to scope, so that's the other 3 partner authorities, with details relating to the scope, resourcing, timetable and governance arrangements to be agreed at a later date. The recommendation to full council today is focused on agreement on these final details, which have been fashioned through a series of group discussions with key members and officers from the 4 local authorities involved in the joint strategy and with representatives from Homes England and the Local Enterprise Partnership. The same recommendations on these details, as set out in the report to the Executive last week, have or very soon will be put before East Devon, Mid Devon and Exeter City Councils with the aim of finalising an agreed approach to joint strategic planning in our local planning authority areas. Moving on to these detailed matters just briefly, the scope of the joint strategy is to be found at 1.6 and 1.7, noting that while the joint strategy will not set the planning authorities of the 4 authorities, this being a matter for individual district local plans, it will provide an overarching framework that allows strategic planning and delivery matters to be considered collaboratively. An indicative timetable for the joint strategy is also listed at 1.12, pointing to a completion and adoption date of early 2023, a timetable now independent of Teignbridge's statutory local plan review schedule. The considerations on resourcing are listed at 1.8, while a further commentary on resourcing options is tabulated in Appendix A. Of the 5 options listed, option 5 is the agreed recommendation, which is to engage a consultant to prepare the joint strategy on behalf of the 4 authorities supported in a limited capacity by a group of officers. Finally, a diagram at Appendix B summarises the proposed governance structure for the joint strategy, while a commentary of the proposed governance notes the importance of the involvement of Homes England and the Local Enterprise Partnership in the Principals Group in helping lever in funding, brokerage and support and facilitating development delivery. Chairman, members, the report to Executive sets out the proposed scope, resourcing, timetable and governance arrangements for preparing a joint strategy for East Devon, Exeter, Mid Devon and Teignbridge. The proposed arrangements are considered to offer the best and most appropriate option for demonstrating and delivering a shared approach to strategic planning matters such as economic and housing development, carbon reduction, digital connectivity, infrastructure delivery and habitats mitigation across the 4 local planning authority areas, whilst enabling each to retain control of the scope and timetable of their own statutory local plans. I'm therefore very pleased to put before you the recommendation from Executive for the support of full Council today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, for that recommendation. That is proposal. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Connett. No need to go to the vote. All those in favour? I think we need to do a count. So please keep your hands at the moment up. Against? Abstentions? That is carried. Thank you very much. Right, we now move on to item 8 on the agenda. This is a recommendation from the Procedures Committee, and it's recommended to full Council that the Council strive to uphold the integrity of the Constitution of this Council, that the Constitution as amended by the Monitoring Officer pursuant to the resolution of full Council 24th of September 19 be reaffirmed as the Council's working Constitution, and the Procedures Committee would undertake to consider any members' queries on the published Constitution at a future meeting, and future changes to the Constitution be brought to the Procedures Committee for onward recommendation. I know this is subject to a bit of conversation earlier. I believe that resolution will take everything into account that has been brought up, and the Procedures Committee has been set up to take care of that. That is what it's there for, so I have no hesitance in recommending that these be adopted by full Council. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bullivant. Any comments? Yeah, we have Councillor, I forget who was first, Councillor Cox.
I think this is really good, and I think we do have to thank Councillor Patch for this, because actually there was really no mechanism to change the Constitution before the elections in 2019. The then executive sought to take off parish councillors from site meetings, and they planned to do it as an executive. If you read the Constitution, that was unconstitutional. It had to be the full council that did it. So really the old Constitution, I'm afraid, wasn't up to standards. It had bits and pieces at it. So I think we now have a roadmap, and I think we do need to thank Councillor Patch, and I hope we can make the changes that he requires. I have got a copy of the 2003 Constitution in paper form, which we were all issued with in the early days, and perhaps we need to go back to the situation where we do give every member a copy of the Constitution. I do take the point that the changes do seem to have gone a little awry in questioning, but we now have a mechanism to change that. So I think we should work with this motion to get the Constitution we deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Patch.
Thank you. I think we should put the record straight on there being no mechanism until this wonderful Procedures Committee was set up. Have members forgot about the Constitution Working Group, which was set up and has sent reports to the full council before now. Surely, once the document had been drafted as a potential new constitution of this council, it would have been put before the Constitution Working Group. This doesn't appear to have been done. The Procedures Committee, which has been set up, has not scrutinised this document to detail the many material changes that are proposed in that document. Councillor Connaught and myself disagree on the process as to sort of whether or not this is actually an adopted constitution of this council. But let's go to the facts of the matter. There are several documented, and these were documented in my original motion to council last year, earlier this year, several material changes in that document to the detriment of the rights of the public to scrutinise this council and the rights of council members to scrutinise this council. Those go beyond the delegated authority given to the monitoring officer. Now, are we as a council happy just to nod through a document on the promise that maybe the Procedures Committee will revisit this document and try and pull out and correct some of those sort of loss of powers? Or are we actually going to say, no, maybe we should have the Procedures Committee, given that the CWG didn't look at this document, provide a report to members as to the full nature, the number and nature and extent of the material changes that are proposed in this document before we adopt it. I think members of the public, particularly at this moment where they want to be asking questions of the council, will not take too kindly to councillors voting through a document which takes away their rights. I certainly don't take kindly to the fact that councillors might vote through a document which takes away rights that I might have to ask questions of this council. And I'll note that the rights that have been inserted into this document for the managing director and the monitoring officer to censor questions have already been used in the case of one question I've been put forward. So this is not a theoretical argument, it's a practical issue. So finally, I would ask that given it is quite a serious issue in terms of the rights of residents of Teignbridge, I would like to request that there be a recorded vote on this, and I would hope that any members who are concerned about these issues raise their hand in support of that.
Yes, we have that noted. Yeah. Okay, fine. Other comments? I think Councillor Malone, did you have your hand up? Okay, fine. Councillor Parker-Khan.
Thank you. I was on the Procedures Committee and we had quite an interesting debate at that committee. I've got no problem with certain parts of this notice of motion. A, I've got no problem with, we should all be upholding the integrity of the Constitution. And C, future changes should be brought to the Procedures Committee for onward recommendation for the Council. It's B, part 1 I've got an issue with, and it's to do with logical procedure. If the full council has approved the monitoring officer to make changes, then the changes that are the minor changes to be made are acceptable according to the motion that was passed by the full council. Why then is this even coming to us at council today for reaffirmation? Either it's legislation that is correct for her to change, or it isn't. There's no need to reaffirm if she's been given authority to do it. So what she's done stands. So why are we reaffirming it? If the changes were being highlighted to us to say, these are the changes that are being made, do you agree with it? I could understand that. What I don't understand is this business of reaffirmation of something that is already set in stone.
Thank you, Councillor Parker-Khan. Councillor Wrigley was the next one.
Thank you, Chair. I have a certain amount of sympathy for Councillor Patch's position, and indeed just simply the formatting of the way the old constitution was on the website compared to the new one makes it very difficult to compare. But I'd like to thank the Procedures Committee for their work on this and taking this forward. And to me, this is simply a matter of saying, we have a bit of a situation here, let's just draw a line, let's get the constitution absolutely clear so no one is in any doubt whatsoever that what is there is what is there. As Councillor Parker-Khan said, it should be there anyway. And let's bring forward, I encourage Councillor Patch to bring forward a full list of all of the amendments that he'd like to see to the next Procedures Committee as soon as possible and go forward. To me, this gives us a way of moving forward practically and actually getting this done and any necessary changes put in place as soon as possible. So I personally will be supporting all of this. Thank you.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I also sympathise with Councillor Patch's point. I would suggest, though, that in terms of minor changes, when you make a minor change, that's one minor change. But when you make a minor change and a minor change and a minor change and a minor change, that's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. It adds up to a much larger number and therefore becomes a major change. And I think that's where perhaps Councillor Patch is now raising concern, is that what we've allowed to happen is a snowball effect, so that what we start off with a small snowball, we end up with a large ball of snow. In my view, I don't think I supported this particular decision when it came to full council the last time, and I had serious concerns around interpretations of things. Now, for instance, one that's been mentioned earlier is the managing director and the monitoring officer deciding what constitutes a vexatious complaint or a vexatious question or a vexatious point. I don't know if fellow colleagues are aware that this council was subject to a decision by the Ombudsman where the monitoring officer and the independent person had decided that something was vexatious in relation to a complaint about a councillor. And actually the local ombudsman said, you haven't defined why it's vexatious or what it is vexatious about it. So in actual fact, the interpretation that the ombudsman said was incorrect. And that's where, in my view, we have a concern that things are being dealt with appropriately. And when you get lots of little changes and it becomes a large change, that's not appropriate. And that's why I have probably more support for Councillor Patch's view on this than most of my colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Connett.
Thank you, Chairman. I have great sympathy with what Councillor Patch has raised, in the sense that Council very clearly authorised the monitoring officer to amend and update the Constitution, and Councillor Parker-Khan is right. That job was done. Why? And I agree with Councillor Parker-Khan on that. If it's right, it's right, and if it's not, you know, what are we doing about it? So I think B1 doesn't need to be here. Say that Councillor Patch has raised a significant point, and we all need to be clear that the Council says that amended Constitution is the current Constitution. That's the one we're all working from. The issue around the Constitutional Working Group is that it's an informal. A working group doesn't have to be diarised, it can meet when it wishes, and it can meet in private. There has been concern in the Council about openness and transparency. A Procedures Committee meets in public, unless it needs to go into Part 2, but it meets in public. It's on the Council agenda, it's on the diary of committee meetings, and all members will be able to see when it meets, and if they want to come or they want to contribute to it, they can. That is a big improvement. So from the very points that Councillor Patch has made, some good work has been done to actually improve the Council's processes, the Procedures Committee. And what it did was look at the work. Now, if I step back one to the Council decision, it would have been, in retrospect, so much better if, for example, a note had been put into the members' newsletter saying, I've modernised or updated the Constitution, it's available on this link, let me know within a period of, I don't know, 5-10 days, whatever it might be, if you've any comments. Now, that didn't happen. There's no reason why it should have happened. We didn't ask for it to happen. It didn't happen. The solicitor monitoring officer did the job Council asked them to do. And we've tried to address that again through the, C, which is future changes to the Constitution be brought to the Procedures Committee. That's both if the Council realises the Constitution might be a bit out of date, as they do get from time to time, but also in future, if the solicitor or monitoring officer are updating, it would provide a junction at which it could be reported to procedures and members would have the opportunity to engage. So we avoid the circumstance that we've got to now. And so we're navigating our way through it. And that's why I say to colleagues, I think this is a pragmatic and practical outcome from the concerns that Councillor Patch has raised, it says, look, the Council does want the integrity of the Constitution. We do support the work that the Council asked the monitoring officer to do, so we are reaffirming that decision. However, the Procedures Committee, not maybe, but will undertake to consider members' queries on the published Constitution at a future meeting, so those can be looked at. And that all future, so that's the future safeguard. Any future changes would come back to the Procedures Committee and then back to Council. And that, I think, responds very positively to all of the concerns that Councillor Patch has raised. And I would invite members to vote for the recommendation, which has been made by the Chairman of the Council and seconded by Councillor Bullivant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connick. Councillor Hook?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think anybody in the room is going to disagree with 8A or 8C, as Councillor Parker-Khan has indicated. Would it help to move this on? And we're in danger of making, I think, a mountain out of a molehill, and I don't mean to be disrespectful in saying that, but in 8B, if we simply remove the words reaffirmed as and accepted everything else that's there, would that not cover all the comments that are being made insofar as any member would then be perfectly free to bring any issue, any constitutional issue, through a process that's outlined there? I mean, I can see no reason against simply removing those two words, reaffirmed as, and I would like to think we could all agree then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Councillor Patch, you have your hand up again.
Thank you. Yes. I think this debate so far has just danced around the process issues about how this document has come forward and whether or not it is actually the lawful constitution of this council. I haven't heard much talk of the actual material changes, the degradation of rights of the public and the degradation of rights of members of this council that are in that document. And it's true that the monitoring officer did do what she was asked to do in terms of tidying up the Constitution. Unfortunately, she rather went beyond that and put in material changes, which she was not authorised to do. And because of that, I don't think it can be considered the lawful constitution of this council, because she went beyond the remit that was given to her. Now, I do have a great deal of respect for Councillor Wrigley in all his interventions since I've been on the council. I think it's a little unfair of him, though, to give me responsibility for scrutinising the new document against the old version of the Constitution and detailing all the changes. I spent a great deal of time and a great deal of effort looking at selected parts of the old Constitution compared against this new document when I submitted my motion back in February. There are documented material changes. The CWG, the Constitutional Working Group, has not looked at this document. It's apparent, well, I can tell you the Procedures Committee haven't scrutinised the material changes. It's not down to me. It is now down to this council, given the failure of the CWG and the Procedures Committee, to take head on this issue of material changes in that document and whether it wants to force them through. Because essentially we're being told, oh, well, that maybe there are material changes. Well, actually, no, we're not talking about them. But just do it. Authorise this constitution and trust us. Maybe we'll look at those rights in the future. And I'm sorry, that won't do.
Councillor Malone.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Patch. That is the important issue here. This new constitution does represent a retreat from transparency. It does represent a retreat from accountability. The monitoring officer was asked to tidy up the constitution, and she took that to mean changing several things that this council did that were utterly at odds with its own constitution at the time, and then changed them after the fact to make it look as if no contravention took place. The monitoring officer undertook a campaign of attrition against myself and Councillor Dawes without any formal complaint. That wasn't permitted in the constitution. Now, hey presto, it is. She said it was fine for a member to vote on an issue where a family member would gain, even though the constitution said it wasn't. So she's tidied that up too. Integrity isn't the word that really occurs to me with regards to changes to this constitution. This is basically changes that are heading away from democracy, away from transparency, and that, frankly, is what characterised the outgoing monitoring officer's tenure. Thank you.
Councillor Cox.
The old constitution actually contradicted itself, had different timescales for things. What had happened as the 2003 constitution had bits added on as legislation changed, as the old Standards Board of England was replaced by the local Standards Board. It frankly was a dog's dinner, and I did the fact that the executive was the previous executive was about to take away the right of parish councils to attend site meetings, not realising no one told them, except for me, that the Constitution actually forbade that, because it had to be, the change had to be made to the Constitution by the full council. So I can understand the reasoning, and to be honest with you, if we were starting out, we wouldn't have started from where we are. We have to start with a legal and workable, but perhaps imperfect Constitution from our point of view, especially over public questions, and amend that and move on from that, and not try and go back to the old constitution. I think that's the way forward. We've got a process with the Procedures Committee. I have tried to go through, it is actually quite difficult to go through the old constitution and the modern one and look at it. What we might be better doing is actually looking at other constitutions of other councils, actually, to see where we could adopt some of their proposals, you know, and I think the ultimate sentence is you, Mr. Chairman, as the chairman of the council, are the guardian of that constitution. But I think I understand what people have said, but actually if we're to move on in a workable way, I think we're going to have to go with what's being proposed. Imperfect as the situation is now, we can move to change things.
Councillor Connett.
Thank you, Chairman. The monitoring officer did the job Council asked the monitoring officer to do. If there is a suggestion that there are material changes, I believe that is Councillor Patch's view. I respect that view. I don't agree with it. There have been changes, there have been amendments. There have been changes and there have been amendments. And the recommendation to colleagues before you from the Procedures Committee deals with all of these issues. Whether you accept the words be reaffirmed or not, it identifies the constitution that the council is working to, so everyone's clear about that. And as much as Councillor Patch wishes to put into some doubt about the Procedures Committee's resolution to tackle the constitution, part of our thinking was that we've heard a lot from Councillor Patch about his concerns from the constitution. And I say that with respectfully to him because he has done a lot of work on this. I'm very grateful to him for that. But we've not heard from other members who may also have either the same concerns or different concerns, wish to draw it to the attention of the Procedures Committee. And that's why B2 is there, which is about drawing all of that in. So actually the Procedures Committee isn't forever looking at the Constitution, but is doing a piece of work on it. And it does take into account the concerns that have been expressed by members to a greater or lesser degree about where we are with it. So I would ask members to support the recommendation that's been made by the Chairman of the Council, seconded by Councillor Bullivant. And further, Chair, I ask that the question is now put, so we go to the vote. Thank you.
I will allow you to come back briefly, Councillor Parker-Khan.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask if it was possible to request a deferment on this item, mainly because we've had some concerns raised here about whether the changes made to the Constitution were material or minor. And if it was a possibility for the Procedures Committee to look at the tracked changes to make an assessment as to whether they were major or minor, and then come back with a proper formal recommendation to this council, I believe that would help eradicate any of the doubts that people might have in their mind. So I don't know whether that's procedurally possible to request a deferment on this item.
Okay, noted. Can very, very briefly, Councillor Patch, very briefly, because you've had quite a bit of say on this.
I do accept that, Chair, and I thank you for allowing me to come back for a final time. I would like to second Councillor Parker-Khan's proposal for deferment. My own view is that an amendment could be passed to say, okay, if you want to authorise this document or reaffirm it, however you want to sort of phrase that, then can that be done taking due regard to the instances of material changes that I had documented in my original notice of motion, and then not making those material changes to the Constitution? But I believe a deferment would be the best option to have this looked at.
Just bear with me a second.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we need some clarification here. I'm happy if Mr. Woodhead would if I get anything wrong, but effectively the Constitution from 2020 is the Constitution this Council works to. That is the legally adopted Constitution. That's legal. In terms of your instruction from the Constitution Working Group and from Council previously for the monitoring officer to make changes, minor changes, that is her discretion. You can't decide at this point whether they were minor or major at your deliberance. It was her decision when you delegated that responsibility to do what she thought was minor or major changes. And I'm sorry, Councillor Patch's assertion that they're major changes is his view. It's not the legal view. It's not the Council's view in terms of the organisation or the legal perspective on it. That's his view. Now, if you wish to take that, I would suggest you take the recommendation as it is and ask Procedures Committee to look at it, which is seemingly to me the sensible thing to do, and look at how you wish to update the Constitution going forwards again. But the one we legally work to is the one from 2020. So effectively, if you delegate it for an officer to do, an officer who is a monitoring officer has the power to make those that they believe to be minor changes. If you believe them to be different, that's a difference of opinion. But the legal responsibility is with the monitoring officer to make those changes as she saw fit at that point in time.
I'm sorry, Councillor Patch. You did say it's your final point, that was, so
authority that was given by this council to the monitoring officer. And to quote from what was in that authority, for the avoidance of doubt, and as indicated above, the existing rules will not be materially changed, i.e. will only cover changes to remove or address clear errors in law or drafting to improve clarity and understanding of the relevant provisions as the monitoring officer considers appropriate. That is what this council agreed to. More than that has been done. Material changes have been made.
That's obviously your opinion, Councillor Patch. Well,
it's
that is your opinion.
Documented record, which stands as a matter of law.
Obviously, you did come back the final time when you promised your final time, so I'm going to call that to a halt. And I have one more councillor who wishes to make comment. No, she's forgotten that. So we had a... Oh, we've got Councillor Dawes. I didn't see that hand, Councillor Dawes.
Thank you. So I'd agree with the points made that the original constitution, the existing constitution, was probably flawed. I'd agree it's an iterative document that should be updated. Councillor Patch is correct that the monitoring officer did overstep her authority. We should recognise that and be grown up enough as a council to address that and grasp that nettle. There were two specific points within there that were done primarily to cover the actions of the monitoring officer in relation to the bringing standards complaints without, bringing standards procedures without a complaint, which changed, and the monitoring officer acted outside of the Constitution in bringing complaints against myself and Councillor Malone, and the conflict of interest changing, downgrading that from a family member to a spouse, doesn't really sit very well, and I think everyone in this room knows why I'm talking about that and what that pertains to. So I'd agree with the points made by Councillor Patch and urge people to vote against that element of this motion.
Thank you,
the
Chairman.
Managing Director is going to clarify one
just
item.
for one point, because it seems to be one that seems to be missed time and time again. The role of the monitoring officer is to hold the standards of the organisation. Beyond the containment of items in the Constitution is their overriding need to maintain standards. If they feel there is a situation that needs to be investigated, they don't have to have a complaint. So if you wish to look at the overriding laws relating to the conduct of councillors, the conduct complaints that may come forward or not, there doesn't have to be specifically a complaint. So please do not be under the misapprehension that you need to write a letter to make a complaint about somebody. If the standards of this council are not upheld in the way in which the monitoring officer believes they should be, then they can investigate and take that forward. So that's an incorrect assumption. Can we move on, please, Chairman?
Yes. Can we move on to the vote, please? One brief comment, Councillor Eden, you hadn't spoken, but then we're going to take the vote. Councillor Eden? Okay. Councillor Eden?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on that point from our Managing Director that, in fact, my experience of that is quite the opposite. And I've got an email trail that shows various monitoring officers telling me that I have to put in a form rather than inform them either verbally or through an email. So perhaps the system has changed, Mr. Shears, but I can actually prove that that is not what has happened in the past.
Right, I will say we did have a motion to defer, and we will go to that vote first before we go to the main vote. So there was a motion put forward by Councillor Parker Khan, and I think it was seconded by Councillor Patch. So can we have a vote, please, on the matter being deferred? Keep hands up, please. Those against deferment? So that item is lost. Now we go to the main vote, which was to, as per the original recommendation, which was seconded by Councillor Bullivant, for this to go forward as it stands. All those in favour? Recorded vote?
Councillor Austin. Councillor Bradford. Councillor Bullivant. Councillor Clarence. Councillor Colclough. Councillor Connett. Councillor Cook. Councillor David Cox. Councillor Hugh Cox. Councillor Dawes. Councillor Dewhurst. Councillor Eden. Councillor Goodman-Bradbury. Councillor Gribble. Councillor Haynes. Councillor Hayes. Councillor Hocking. Councillor Gordon Hook. Councillor Jackie Hook. Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Jeffries. Councillor Keeling. Councillor Kerswell. Councillor McGregor. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Malone. Councillor Nutley. Councillor Nuttall. Councillor Orme. Councillor Parker Khan. Councillor Patch. Councillor Phipps. Councillor Purser. Councillor Russell. Councillor Swain. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Thorne. Councillor Wrigley. Councillor Evans. Councillor Parker.
4. That is carried and it goes forward as stands. Thank you very much, councillors. We'll now move on to item 9, which is another recommendation from the Procedures Committee and the Standards Subcommittee. And it's recommended to full council that 1. The council's procedure rules should be amended so that councillors serving on the planning committee are no longer permitted to vote on applications within their ward. 2. Motions to approve, refuse, defer planning applications should be made at the end of a debate on the application, which would allow any questions raised during debate to be answered. 3. All councillors be reminded that the deadline for submission of new evidence information on planning application being considered by Planning Committee is midnight Thursday prior to the meeting and no later. And 4. Any new information or submissions regarding planning applications should be submitted to the planning email address by midnight Thursday prior to the meeting. Now, what I do propose is to take each one of these individually. So I would recommend that this be put forward as a block, but I would like individual comments on each item. So, item 1. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like these to be taken individually because I have a very deep-seated problem with item 1. Just because a councillor is elected to a ward does not mean that they cannot be objective about a planning application. And to say otherwise is unfair, and it's pretty judgmental already. It's not up to the council to determine whether a councillor has a conflict of interest on a planning application. It is up to the individual. Perhaps what we need to be looking at, if there are issues around this, is a more robust training system. All councillors receive statutory training before taking part in planning committees. Perhaps if this is turning out to be a problem, perhaps the training needs to be addressed. I cannot support item 1. I find it rather authoritarian and somewhat illiberal.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Malone.
Yeah, part 1, if passed, is going to make it impossible for members of the Planning Committee to vote on anything in their own ward, even if they have no pecuniary interest and there's no personal advantage to the vote going one way or another. As you know, NSN was formed to fight a single local issue on environmental grounds. We've had to fight each time to keep our single vote on planning and prove that Janet has no financial stake in the outcome. Lovers, haters, or really haters, we were elected by people who wanted a voice on the planning decisions where they live. And that's what local democracy is. For people electing people to represent their communities and counter the challenges that they perceive coming against them. In the age of biodiversity collapse and climate change, most of these challenges will come from development via planning. Now, if passed, this is going to disenfranchise anyone concerned about a local issue, a beauty spot, a daycare centre, a cinema, a bypass. They won't be able to organise and seek a mandate at election because there won't be any point. Any advocate for them will be left voiceless simply because they live in the place a project is scheduled for. Now, as annoying as we may have been for the executive, have we really pushed you so far that you want to disenfranchise entire communities and gag their representatives? Because we've had our struggles with the previous Tory administration of TDC on planning matters. You know, they rode roughshod over what people wanted, shrugged at petitions and said, so what? But they never came to the chamber and set about cynically dismantling the voice of local people and their representatives just to give themselves a slightly easier ride. There's no argument about legal exposure in conflicts of interest cases because the Localism Act 2011, Chapter 6, Section 25 is written to specifically avoid any possibility of legal challenge based on predetermination. So there's absolutely no need for this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malone. Councillor Wrigley.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support many of the comments come forward already. I don't agree with any of these proposals in this entire piece, I'm afraid, and will be voting against all of them. Particularly as a Liberal Democrat, I fundamentally believe that decisions should be made as close to those affected as possible. That's why I'm proud that we've enabled town councils to have more of a say in the planning process. Our hands are tied by the planning process already to a huge extent, and the system is very much geared up in favour of the developers. We have to carry on enabling the local ward members to be the voice of their community. Now, I'm not on the planning committee, this doesn't impact me, but definitely do not think we should take away the participation of the local member in voting on that planning committee. I understand why this was put together, but this is a bit like the famous Dangerous Dogs Act, where a knee-jerk reaction was taken in Parliament, which gave us an unworkable situation because of a problem that was perceived to have happened. This is not the right answer to the problem. Yes, we can make improvements to the way we run our planning committee. Yes, there are things that can be done better. No, I don't think this is the right answer. I personally will be voting against all 4 of these, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Councillor Swain.
Chair, I can see that these proposals come from a sensible place. I think a point nobody's made is that this might be viewed as protecting the members from contentious decisions. But I am still against it, I'm afraid. We come from a 3-seat ward in Ken Valley. Because we don't have proportional representation, all 3 of those seats are held by Liberal Democrats. I'd be the first to agree that's not fair, and I campaign against it. But in the planning committee, we do have proportional representation. We've got political balance across the committees. It would be perfectly possible that all 3 Ken Valley councillors would be on the planning committee, which would be proportionally balanced, and then every single planning application that came up for Ken Valley, 3 members would be removed from the decision, all from one party. That wouldn't be fair. Thank you.
Councillor Patch.
Thank you. Yes, as has been pointed out, this strikes to the heart of local representation. If locally elected representatives of communities cannot exercise a vote, having taken into account all the material considerations and the arguments for and against, then a big link is cut between the representational power of that member and their ability to sort of represent the views of their communities. I don't see that there's a need for this. I know where this is coming from. I believe we will talk about the rest of the items 2, 3 and 4 after this, but so I'll just finally say on this item, who will benefit from this? It's likely to be developers, I would think. Now, there's a certain party that gets a lot of flack for being the developer's friend and writing developers' charters. I think we all need to think about where this is coming from and what the implications are.
Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Chair. I've chosen to speak against this motion. I'm going to cover some of the elements behind my reason for speaking against the 4 points specifically. On the 6th of July, the Standards Committee subcommittee met. Present at that meeting were Councillors Connaught Pert and Councillor Petherick as chair. There's a deputy monitoring officer present, but I noticed the council solicitor wasn't there, nor the other qualified legal person. The hearing was convened to hear a complaint about predetermination against Councillor Patch. The nature of the complaint being heard at Standards was a considerable surprise to me because predetermination is a civil law matter, not a standards matter, and as such should have been heard either through the Planning Inspectorate's appeal process or should have been heard in judicial review. This then brought these recommendations, and there is no indication as to where these recommendations were authored, so who actually decided on these recommendations coming forward. Predetermination has not been found at this council since its inception against any member. That's a clear case of a procedure being implemented to deal with something that hasn't existed so far. Predisposition is not the same as predetermination, it has to be said. In terms of the actual first motion, that councillors cannot serve on the committee and vote on matters in their own ward, how does that deal with councillors who live in a different ward but also are going to be impacted? Are they also going to be restricted from voting on planning? So where Councillor Eden, for instance, is in Teignmouth Central and a planning application comes up there, and I'm also living in Teignmouth Central and a planning application, the same planning application, am I therefore then able to vote or not? Because that has a direct impact on me. There's a direct potential influence for me. So it's unclear as a process in that instance, a situation where a councillor lives in a different ward and has an application. And that would then therefore indicate an inconsistent approach at best. The other points, I'll cover those individually as I come through them, but what I would like to say is, this is a solution for a problem that does not exist. It's a solution that treats us like children. A solution that erodes local democracy, and a solution delivered, in my view, under dubious circumstances. Before I move to reject this first motion, I would like to thank the contribution from David Cox in respect of pointing me to the past probity matter and the fact that predetermination is a civil law matter, and in inner words, not the competence of the authority. I would move that at least this first one is rejected, and if there's a second, then perhaps after the rest of the debate.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. Councillor Connett.
Thank you, Chairman. I would say these recommendations are an example, actually, of our constitution working and democracy in action. So let's just look at where they come from. They are recommendations via the Standards Subcommittee, and as has been mentioned, that was me, Councillor Pert and Councillor Petherick, having dealt with a matter before the Standards Subcommittee, then decided to take it further and say, maybe there's a case here for Council to consider these matters. And it made a recommendation to the Procedures Committee, who considered it further, and then make a recommendation to Council. That is a good process. It says, look, something was brought to us of a concern. We want to share that with you. We want the Council to decide whether, for example, it wants to change the rule so that members on the Planning Committee don't have a vote, or you keep your vote. So the conversation which has been about, oh, the executive want to close people up, well, this isn't from the executive. It's from a Standards Subcommittee via procedures to Council. It's a conversation about whether you say the vote for a member on the Planning Committee on an application in a ward takes the priority over, for example, the risk of the pressure applied to a councillor or being seen to somehow sort of favour one side or another. Now, I should be voting in favour of one because I think actually on balance, and for me it's a fine judgment call, but on balance I think that's the right thing to do. But I fully respect the desire of councillors to say no. If I'm on planning, I want to vote on all matters, and including those in my ward. Perfectly fine, understandable. I don't have an argument about it. But I do think it's right that our constitution and the way this has worked has brought it to you for conversation and discussion today at this meeting. And I'm rather surprised, given some of the earlier debate about, let's have a constitution, let's talk about it. Suddenly, why are we talking about this now? This is outrageous. Who put this on the agenda? This shouldn't be allowed. This is immoral. This shouldn't be going on. When actually it's down to you as members to decide, and it's come from the right place in the right way for your consideration. And if you're for it, that's fine, and if you're against it, that's perfectly fine too. You know, it's about you deciding what your constitution is and what it will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hook.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to also agree with much of what's been said, but in particular I wanted to agree with the first comments made by Councillor Morgan. The implication of what is being recommended is that councillors cannot be objective about some applications in their own ward. I've been on planning committee since 2011. Our duty at the planning committee is to consider the interests of the wider district in the round when we consider applications. I'd like to think I always do that. I like the fact that we've made votes publicly available so that we have to explain the decision we've made to the public, and I like to think and I hope every other planning committee member would be able to explain to the public why they voted the way they did, even though sometimes we're faced with the most incredibly difficult decisions where really we've only got two decisions, a bad decision to make it or a worse decision, and we have to choose between them. It's a very difficult committee. The decisions we make are difficult. I'd like to think I could always explain it and always be objective. If a councillor has an interest, which means they're not able to do that, then they need to declare it, as has been stated. But we shouldn't take away the right of councillors to vote on applications in their own ward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Hook. Councillor Bullivant.
Thank you. Item 1 here is a very difficult question to answer. In terms of looking at the structure of the planning committee, the committee is there, as Councillor Hook has just said, to represent the wider interests of the 130-odd thousand people of Teignbridge. However, it's also a fact that with 17 members on that committee, that means there are 30 councillors who already do not have a voice anyway, or a vote. Every councillor has a voice. Every councillor has the option of attending a committee meeting of the planning committee to present an argument one way or the other in favour or against a particular application. So that voice is always there to be heard. It's up to the councillor to make his voice heard in those circumstances. But the issue for me here is not that. We're increasingly seeing the seek to question the integrity of councillors. And to me, there are 47 councillors in this room, and their integrity I respect. And I think in this case, we should respect the integrity of our councillors. We shouldn't put in front of them barriers to prevent them representing through a vote. And for that reason, I'm afraid, in terms of question 1, I have a great difficulty in supporting removing a councillor because of a particular location or where they represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bullivant. Councillor Gribble.
Thank you, Chairman. I think local towns and parishes, the constituents there vote for us to represent us councillors to represent their towns and parishes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Clarence, up the front.
I've enjoyed being on the planning committee since 2003 when I was first elected here, and I always proud to vote the way I do for applications in our ward, and I wouldn't want to see that taken away from me. I think local people need to know the way you voted about which and what, and you know, that's how I feel. I'm agreeing, I think, with the majority of the room here almost. We'll see what happens at the vote. Thank you.
Councillor Parker-Khan.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of people have passed, and I was only going to say I find myself surprisingly agreeing with Councillor McGregor on this one. I think everything's been said. I think it removes ability to put forward our point of view as a councillor that represents the ward, and we have a mechanism in place for us to be able to declare an interest so that you don't vote where necessary. So I think this potentially is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and it might be useful to vote soon.
I think I agree. Councillor Patch, you've got your hand up. I know it's been up for a minute.
Yeah, sorry, just to say, Chair, in the event that it's not a unit, that we all don't vote the same way when we vote by show of hands, can we have a recorded vote if it's not unanimous? I'd ask for support, and I'd ask for those to support that to raise their hands.
I think we have enough for that. Yep, that's fine. Okay. I'm just going to pass over to the Managing Director for a moment.
Thank you, Chairman. Totally understand members' views. This wasn't officers bringing forward these set of recommendations. This was certainly something that was from the standards and the procedures committees. Just for your knowledge, we as officers and the planning department and legal would support 2, 3 and 4 because we think that's a tidying up and would protect you going forward. Totally recognise what Councillor McGregor has said. However, with the more litigious society we're living in and the challenges that you're facing, it would make a sensible tidying up in terms of making evidence available on the website earlier, getting applicants and objectors to be able to see that, because that could be both sides, and also in terms of the motions and whether you're going to recommend approval or rejection of that planning application, doing that at the end of the debate rather than asking questions during it and then making a statement at the end of your speech before people have had a chance to either respond to that or others to hear it and debate those issues. So totally understand if where you may wish to go with one, but 2, 3 and 4 would just ask for your consideration, because we think that would protect you as a council and a planning department better going forwards, because it wasn't an ideal scenario we think going forwards, and I think that would make a sensible policy to bring in. But thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Dawes, did you have your... Councillor?
Yes, I'd agree with what many people have said, that it's sort of following the undemocratic and unrepresentative trend. The point 2 seems to make no sense at all, that you have motions at the end of the debate, because surely you have a motion and then debate and speak to the motion. I thought that's what democracy asked for. Equally, point 3 seems to be stuck in some sort of weekly time warp, that the meeting has to be on a certain day. It doesn't actually say what day the meeting's on. It should sensibly, if it was to be voted on, I'd vote against it, but say a number of days rather than a Thursday. And I was going to suggest it was a recorded vote, but it is indeed. Thank you.
Councillor Carswell, and it's nice to see you here, Councillor Carswell.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been on the Town Council Planning Committee since 2000, and I've been on Teambridge District Council Planning Committee since I came on about 8 years ago. I feel that my integrity has never been questioned. I do represent my community, but I also do represent Teambridge in the round, and I will continue to do that for as long as I serve on Teambridge District Council. I agree with everything that my colleagues have said here this morning, and I shall not be voting for item 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carswell. Councillor Connett.
Chairman, I'm very mindful of all of the comments received from colleagues, and I'm thinking with regard to item 1, in order to save a bit of time on a recorded vote, would Council agree to item 1 simply being withdrawn? And if it's withdrawn, that's the end of the matter.
Are councillors happy with that it is withdrawn, because all the comments seem to be to that effect? Happy to second it, yes. I think everyone is happy with that situation. So, right, did you want to make a comment, Councillor Wrigley? Just. We ought to have our name tag, didn't we, really? Well, we have.
Thank you. I'll point to everybody so we know where the microphone has to go. Firstly, I'd like to sort of thank the Standards Committee and the Procedures Committee for bringing this forward. And as Councillor Connett says, it's right that we debate it. I was going to second Councillor McGregor's motion, which I don't think was second, that this was voted on, that this was rejected. I think I'd prefer to see it rejected rather than withdrawn, because once it's rejected, it's gone. If it's withdrawn, it can come back again.
Well, there was a proposal to have it withdrawn. I mean, if anyone would like to second that it's withdrawn.
So
Councillor Dewhurst.
Chair, we have a proposal that was made and seconded first, which I think we should vote on before a new proposal.
Okay, that proposal is from Councillor McGregor? Yes. Right. Would you like to repeat? Councillor McGregor? Briefly.
My view is that this is a solution without a problem, and as such I would recommend that we reject this particular aspect, point number 1.
Okay, this is point number 1, and that was seconded by Councillor Wrigley, okay. Shall we go to the vote? And we wanted a recorded delivery, recorded vote, and recorded delivery, very good. Recorded vote.
Councillor Austin. Councillor Bradford. Councillor Bullivant. Councillor Clarence. Councillor Cochler. Councillor Connett. Councillor Cook. Councillor Cook. Councillor David Cox. Councillor Hugh Cox. Councillor Dawes. Councillor Dewhurst. Councillor Eden, Councillor Goodman-Bradbury, Councillor Gribble, Councillor Haynes, Councillor Hayes, Councillor Hocking, Councillor Gordon Hook, Councillor Jackie Hook, Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Jeffries, Councillor Keeling, Councillor Kerswell, Councillor McGregor, Councillor Morgan, Councillor Malone, Councillor Nutley, Councillor Nuttall, Councillor Parker-Calm, Councillor Patch, Councillor Phipps, Councillor Purser, Councillor Russell, Councillor Swain, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Thorne, Councillor Wrigley, Councillor Evans, Councillor Parker.
Abstain. Right. Councillor Dawes has your hand up.
Hi, I've got a point of order. Could we please have a comfort break?
Yes, I was just going to mention that situation. What I'd like to be able to do is to complete this item if we could before we have a comfort break, if that's okay. I think a lot of the comments have been made in respect of items 2, 3 and 4.
I'm sorry, I really want to vote on this item, but I'd like a comfort break now. Thank you.
I think we will go with that. We've gone on a bit longer, so I'll say that we'll have a comfort break at this time. So it'll be 10 minutes. Welcome back, councillors. I hope that suitably refreshed you. Thank you. Right, we're on item 9, part 2. What I'm going to suggest, unless people have got additional comments on each item, which I'm happy to take, we will go to votes on each one in turn, unless anyone has any comments on each individual, which a few have already. Okay. Right. Okay, then we'll go to part 2. Have I got anyone who would like to speak on part 2? Yeah, Councillor Wrigley was the first one, looks like it.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I can understand why something might be done about the form of the debate, but I think Councillor Dawes already raised the standards, the rules of debate as set out in the Constitution say you have a proposal, then you have a discussion. You debate the proposal. You cannot have a debate unless you have a proposal. So what's laid out here is actually against the Constitution that we've just reaffirmed, as far as I can work out. I wouldn't go against thinking about whether we separate the questions to the officer, so we can probe for information first and then have a debate. That might be a workable solution. But I think what's written here will cause confusion and will not be as useful as the current debates are. So I would be voting against this for that reason.
Councillor...
I'd propose refusal of this for that reason.
Okay, noted. Councillor McGregor?
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Wrigley, I have similar views on the debate process, but would also like to suggest that on occasion, for instance, on a deferral, sometimes a planning application has come with last-minute changes which are significant, and therefore the debate really can't be held effectively because of that information. And I would second that motion of Councillor Wrigley.
Noted. Thank you. Councillor Patch?
Thank you. Well, notwithstanding Mr. Shear's warm words in support of 2, 3 and 4, I'd like to submit I think they're all a nonsense. As has been pointed out, number 2 is contrary to the Constitution and in fact the way that debates work in terms of talking to a motion. Parts 3 and parts 4 do not take into account what would happen with the information arising after that deadline. What does it disappear into the void? Is it not considered? And also, as I believe Councillor Dawes or what another member has pointed out, what about if planning meetings are moved to another day? The reference to Thursday does not really make any sense. In terms of the item 2 and the timing of motions, the administration of proposals for or against, my mind's drawn back to a planning training meeting, not the last one we had, but the previous one, where we had a very experienced planning consultant taking our planning training who mentioned what other authorities do in addressing this issue of motions for or against early in a debate. And he suggested that Teambridge consider having a starting position of working with the motion or the recommendations of the officer, which would then remove this issue of who makes the proposal. I would think that would be certainly something worth considering rather than this, which is contrary to the Constitution. I hear a proposal put forward to reject item 2. I would say, based on the nonsensical nature of the 3 and 4, I would like to move on block that we vote to reject 2, 3 and 4.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. Item 2 is a one-size-fits-all item. It doesn't consider the individual nature of each application that comes forward, and it would also stifle debate. For example, we may realise very quickly on in the officer's presentation that this is contentious, this needs a site visit, in which case you need to decide to defer straight away. So it stifles debate. It's a one-size-fits-all item. I'm not on the planning committee here, but I'm on Dartmoor National Park. We start from the officer's recommendation as the debate point there, and that seems to work extremely well, and then members can add in a proposal as the debate proceeds. Items 3 and 4, I had mixed feelings about this because hopefully it would also apply to developers with last-minute information as well as objectors. However, for significant and complex applications, there may be late submissions regarding ecology reports. There may be changes in government bills or legislation that would have an effect on this. And these do seem to happen overnight at the moment. So I would like to second Councillor Patch's proposal that we reject all of these en bloc.
Noted. Councillor Malone.
Thank you. I think the nub of this item is not pass or reject, but the word defer. The planning proposals will only be deferred after they've been thoroughly discussed. Of course, it's human nature not to want to bin something after 3 hours of back and forth, just have to do the same thing again in 2 months. This is an attempt to get more things passed, but through exhaustion, through cynicism, through the simple fact that we'd all like to have a family life, and notwithstanding the changes to the working hours that are being pushed on us. So it's going to get passed because we're all exhausted and feeling cynical about the motion, rather than looking at each proposal clearly and on its own merits. If this is passed, then frankly I don't think anything will be deferred anymore, even when there's evidence and key facts missing.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes, did you have your hand up? Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I have observed other planning committees from time to time, excuse me, due to the work I've done related to an earlier item we were discussing. Some planning committees do have questions before they actually then go into the debate. And I know that's what I think Councillor Wrigley was initially hinting at. So I think that would be, although it's not before us now, that would be a useful way of looking at how this could be dealt with at some future time. Others definitely are of the same view as what's expressed here. And at the end of the day, it's looking at the issue of predetermination. That's how it got here today. It's something that came from Standards Committee because of the perception by the public that it's predetermined when somebody proposes something right at the outset before perhaps questions have been answered. So on two, whilst I understand what members are saying, I feel that we ought to look at the opportunity for questions before a motion's put. So for that reason, I'm obviously happy to go along with it not being carried in that form today. The other two are to make sure that members of the committee have got all the information before them in good time. And I think it was Councillor Morgan talked about things being sprung, very much at the last minute. We want to avoid that so that members have had the chance to look at any information and then be able to assimilate that as part of their decision-making process. So for that reason, I can see why the other two are being suggested that it should form part of our practice. And essentially it does in the sense that things coming in go on to the late representations sheet, which members then get and which is published the day before committee, in order that members do get this late information. So at the end of the day, the whole point is to try and make it that members are not perceived to be predetermined and that they have all the information available for them so that they can make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Hook.
Thanks, Chair. I think the problem with 3 and 4 is that they're time specific. Nobody's actually said that this is to allow officers to respond or members to familiarise themselves. The illusion or the intention, I'm sure, has been there, but I can't support 3 and 4 while it is time specific. If we're going to talk about Thursday midnight, that's making the assumption, I think, that planning committees are held on the Monday or the Tuesday, allowing a certain time frame for consideration. These need to be rewritten if they're going to be accepted, I believe, and therefore I shan't be able to vote for them in their current form. If we were to say midnight on Thursday, assuming that planning is held on the Tuesday morning, let's say, that might be possible. But as things stand, this is very unclear and needs to be removed and rewritten. Thank you.
Councillor Cox. You did put your hand up, Councillor Cox, did you?
I was just going to say, I was going to propose that we defer reference back to the Procedures Committee, because there are some good ideas here, and rather than throw them out completely, they could be redone. I like the question idea suggested by Councillor Ridley, that would seem to solve that problem.
Okay. Councillor Malone.
Councillor Haynes is referring to concerns of the public over predetermination. I think that's another one of our ghosts, isn't it? And it's not yet Halloween. There has been no such concerns expressed by the public. What he's referring to is a complaint by the owner of Trago Mills, who didn't get a vote going the way he wanted. That is an entirely different subject, and it doesn't inform what we're talking about here.
Councillor Bullivant.
Thank you. In terms of item 2 on the list here, the principle being discussed really relates to the training that people had when they were first appointed to the committee. And basically, the point about predetermination was made very, very clear as part of that training. And I'm surprised it's being raised now as a question. It's very clear that councillors sitting on the planning committee are there to represent and hear all views before reaching a conclusion. And in that case, what's asked for here is that is legitimised in terms of not being in a position to declare a position before all points of view have been considered and expressed. And in that regard, I think this is a sensible adaptation or alteration to our procedures. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Connett.
Thanks, Chairman. With regard to 2, I remember there was a discussion about whether you should the starting point should be that the officer recommendation is the one, if you like, that is automatically seconded. That is the recommendation before the committee. And we felt in our discussions that actually members might not like that because it might imply that the officers somehow were dictating the debate of the conversation. So the idea was actually not to do that, to do something different. And in terms of where we're at now, I was interested to hear what the practice is at Dartmoor National Park, which is to work on the basis of the recommendation. That forms the discussion. Because here in Teambridge, we all know what the game is. The officer recommendation is there, and if you are wanting to propose refusal or approval, contrary to what the officer recommendation is, you need to get in quick, make that recommendation and get one of your planning committee colleagues to second it, and that then becomes a substantive motion. The problem with that is that for members of the public, whether they are in the chamber or viewing online, they may not know that, and so you say, Chairman, I move refusal, I move approval, someone else quick jumps in to say seconded. You then set out the reason why you're saying that. And that's fine, isn't it? Except that a debate then follows on that, but you've already declared your hand, and might that look as though you were predetermined? Because immediately the debate had started, you set that. So it was, from a good place to try and actually make sure councillors could debate, could ask questions, could inquire of planning officers, highways officers, whoever else there is. You have the debate and then you make a recommendation, which might be the officer recommendation, it might be something different. Again, if members feel that the current practice that Teambridge has is fit and proper for purpose, that's perfectly fine. We've heard that Dartmoor National Park do something slightly different. It's about trying to learn from others and trying to put ourselves in a good place. I wasn't referring to any particular issue about planning members or a planning application. It was about the Standards Committee or the subcommittee and procedures, again saying to members, do you want to look at this? Do you want to think there's time and merit for a change? If you do, that's good, and if you don't, that's perfectly fine as well. It's your planning committee and your set of rules. In terms of 3 and 4, I think I'd probably put my hand up to the guilt of simplicity being the enemy of clarity. Our meetings are on a Tuesday or whatever day of the week they are, and so Thursday prior was seen to be easier to say. You're right, if planning was on a Thursday or a Friday, we would have to change that. And to that respect, if people feel that it should be that specific, then we should take 3 and 4 back and come back with something more appropriately worded that fits in with a sort of non-specific day of the week for the planning committee. And I think 3 and 4 reference back would be easier if people are minded to understand what we're trying to do is make sure all of the members have all of the information available and there are no late submissions that someone, frankly, says, 50 pages of additional information were emailed out to me on a Sunday night for a planning committee on a Monday morning. I've not had a chance to read it. So this again, 3 and 4 are about trying to assist members rather than hinder them. But your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Connaught. Councillor Haynes, did you want to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a personal explanation since I was named. The comments I made related to those that I've experienced across the country in terms of the public perception and indeed other ones over the years at Teambridge. I wasn't making reference to any specific case that went to the planning committee, other than the fact that this reference came from the Standards Committee. Can I say, I think Councillor Cox moved reference back. I'm not sure if it was seconded. If it was, if it wasn't, then I wish to second it for the 3 items.
That's back to the Procedures Committee. Yeah. Councillor Wrigley.
Thank you. I think Councillor Haynes has just done what I was trying to do, which was to second Councillor Connaught's refer back 3 and 4. So I think that's very much a sensible way to go forward with that. So Councillor Cox wanted 2, 3 and 4. I'm supporting Councillor Connaught on referring back 3 and 4. Seconding Councillor Connaught.
Okay. Councillor McGregor.
Chair, we had a
Yes, I know about the throw. Coming there in a minute, Councillor Patch.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to point out that points 1 and 2 are very different to points 3 and 4, in that points 1 and 2 are actual motions and point 3 and 4 are recommendations about how members are advised on procedure. In terms of 3 and 4, we know there are deadlines. Developers also know there are deadlines, and sometimes, for instance, a recent application, a developer dumped hundreds of pages of changes and amendments onto the portal just before it closed off, and then we had a planning meeting the following Tuesday. The right thing to do was to move immediately to defer, so that those could be properly investigated. So, you know, as Councillor Morgan says, what we're trying to do here is a one-size-fits-all. And in a situation where we get developers exploiting their ability to massively exploit the planning portal and the deadlines to the detriment of councillors and residents who are objectors, then we would be failing in our duty if we then proceeded to debate. And I'm absolutely convinced, you know, I know Councillor Haynes is a very patient man, that he would not allow us to debate every item of information in a case where hundreds of pages are dumped, because it is very technical and a lot of expertise is particularly needed from planning officers as well in assessing that information. So from my perspective, it's a one-size-fits-all, and I would definitely move that we go to the vote on this now on the first option, which is to reject 2, and then go to the second option, which is to reject, to refer back 3 and 4, which was Councillor Connett's motion, and seconded by Councillor Wrigley.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. We seem to have a variety of ways forward here. Councillor Patch, is that what you put your hand up for, to refer to that?
Well, no, I think you recognise that point, Chair. Yeah. I just wanted to refer back to, on a couple of occasions, well, I think more than 2, at least 3 times, references we made to the origins of these recommendations, being a standard case that was brought against me. I'd just like to put forward my view that this was a deeply flawed investigation that resulted in a deeply flawed decision notice.
I don't think that's particularly relevant.
But also, thinking about addressing these issues. Now, if this council had received a formal complaint of planning procedures, the way they're operated, the role of officers, including planning and legal officers in administration of a planning decision, even amounting to claims of systemic failure at the council, would we expect the council to carry out some kind of review of planning procedures, which might get to the depth of issues that are to be investigated? Now, I ask that question if it's a hypothetical question. I don't think it's proper that I say whether that's happened or not. But I just would like to question the origin of these recommendations, and to my mind, there has not been a full consideration of the issues that have been put forward as problematic in Teambridge regarding planning, and there's not a link between that and these recommendations that have come forward.
Thank you, Councillor Patch. I don't know if there's anyone else I've missed. Obviously not, no. Now, you did put forward a recommendation, I think was seconded by Councillor Morgan, which was to vote on block on all items 2, 3 and 4. Was that the... That was...
Thank you, Chair. I think I made the first proposal that was then seconded by Councillor McGregor.
Could you just briefly repeat that again?
Which was to reject item number 2.
Reject item 2. Right. We'll go to the vote on item number 2 to reject. Okay.
My recommendation was to reject on block 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologies.
We'll go with Councillor Wrigley's at this time. So to reject item 2, seconded by Councillor McGregor. All those in favour to reject item 2? If you're happy to do it by hand. Against? Abstain. That's carried. Right, so that's item 2 not gone through. So we're now to the next items, 3 and 4. I think we had a thing from Councillor Connett, which was to refer back 3 and 4 to procedures. Seconded by Councillor Wrigley. Can we go to the vote, please? All those in favour that we refer it back? Against? Abstentions? None. That's carried. Both that's carried. So items 3 and 4 are referred back to the Procedures Committee. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on, and I'd like now to go to item 12. Which is an initial presentation from the Executive Member for Corporate Resources, Councillor Keeling. This is just the initial, before we go into part 2, explanation of the Bradley Lane regeneration. Councillor Keeling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, colleagues. Before we go to part 2 for exempt financial information, I would like to thank all those officers who have been involved in the regeneration project of a brownfield site, especially Tom Butcher, lead officer, and Neil Blaney, head of place and commercial services. I would also, with the chairman's permission, like to say a few words in the public domain. This proposal offers delivery on all our council priorities for homes, jobs, and tackling climate change. The offer also proposes a mix of property sizes to meet local needs, with smaller properties for first-time buyers and downsizers alike. The affordable housing offer is more than the policy requirements in Newton Abbot, and as a landowner, we have a proposal that will secure best financial value for the taxpayer and give us a capital receipt that could be invested into future projects. This is a sustainable location in many ways, with easy access to the town centre, excellent walking and cycling routes. It will comply with carbon reduction targets as a minimum and will increase flood capacity with improvements to the River Lemon corridor. The Council has undertaken a rigorous procurement exercise over the last 2 years to get us to the recommendation before councillors, a scheme that achieves the briefing agreed by the Executive in 2019. Members are being asked to consider this proposal as the landowner of this site. The briefing last Monday to all councillors, Newton Abbot town councillors and partners was cut short by the impending overview and scrutiny 1, but I can assure councillors that subject to an approval there will be full questions and answers session giving more details in the October-November. Again, to district councillors, town councillors and partners. Subject to agreement of the offer, the developer will need to secure planning permission, which members will be able to consider and design details of the proposal of the land of the local planning authority. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Keeling. Right, now then, item 13, I would like to recommend at this time that under section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following items on the grounds that they involve likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1, 2 and 3 of the part 1 of the 12A, Schedule 12A of the Act. I so move. Can I have a seconder to that, please? Thank you, Councillor McGregor. And I'm just waiting for confirmation that live streaming has been cut. We're now on to item 10, which is notices of motion. And the first one I'd like to come to is Councillor McGregor. You'd like to present your notice of motion?
Thank you, Chair. What I will say is that it's there for everybody to read. It's also on the website. But this particular motion was penned some time ago. I was unable to attend the full council meeting it was supposed to be at originally because I had better things to do the following day and had some preparations to make. In real terms, there are some changes to government policy and direction that have been evident over the last period of time. I think the actual motion itself, the elements that we're asking for, are still relevant, but there are additional elements. I was going to re-author it, but Councillor Connaught perhaps might have a different view and a better way to handle that process. But I would move that we do write to the government and the various ministers that are responsible, and particularly around the last point on the actual substantive motion, which is to reintroduce the ban on neonicotinoids. That actually hasn't been revoked as a use, but emergency derogations are continuing to be granted to agricultural sector to use neonicotinoids, and that is an absolute element that we must stop as soon as possible if we are to retain our ability to produce the food that we want to have high import standards and high production standards across the rest of the sector. So from my perspective, I would like to reintroduce the motion as it stands at the moment, but also perhaps with Council's permission come back with some additional ones later.
Yeah. So you're referring it?
Referring it to the
executive?
Yeah.
Okay. So the proposal to move it to the executive. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Wrigley. All those in favour? Against? Against? Abstentions? No. Fine. Thank you very much. That's referred to executive. We'll now move on to notice of motion number 2. Councillor Eden, if you'd like to present this notice of motion.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to be careful how I pronounce this. I'm going to talk about ethics, not Essex, because I have a professional life as a former chair of a National Health Service Ethics Committee, and a professional life in informed consent and worrying about how people make decisions and undue influence, and importantly, in declaring conflicts of interest. And it's my view that we need to clarify our current process in terms of the definition of conflict of interest. And those of you who've had time to read the wording that's been supplied will see that I'm referring back to the Charity Commission in terms of actually suggesting that we define a connected person as follows: family, relatives, business partners of a councillor, as well as businesses in which a councillor has an interest through ownership or influence. And that term I'm proposing needs to include councillors' spouses, unmarried partners, civil partners, so on, children, siblings, grandchildren. And the most important point I think I should make is this. A number of people have referred to whether somebody has integrity or not integrity. It's not about that. It's not a binary thing. The whole point about declaring an interest or a conflict of interest is understanding within yourself whether something about the proposal is linked to you in some way, and understanding that that is getting in the way of your objectivity. So I think Councillor Bullivant mentioned earlier on he was concerned about accusations of lack of integrity. This shouldn't be about that. This is about understanding conflict of interest. In relation to that, just quickly, sound effects of turning paper, I'm also interested, I really want to push forward a further clarity over what we mean in terms of conflict of loyalty, in terms of our registry of interests. Now, I'm aware that at the County Council, members are required, for example, to notify their membership of the Freemasons, and I think TDC should do the same as well. I think they should be aligned. So those are the main points I wanted to make, and just to really say we should always, all of us, be asking ourselves, are we biased? And not asking ourselves, have I got integrity or not? Because that's not the issue at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eden. Is this something they would like debated at this time? Because if you do, we need 2/3 of us here to be debated. Or would you like to refer it?
I'd love to debate it, but it's been a long morning, and I think it would be cruel to suggest that, so I'm happy to refer it.
Happy to refer it to standards. Yeah. Right, the proposal is to refer it to standards. Seconder for that, please. Councillor McGregor. All those in favour? All against? Any against? Abstentions? One abstention. Fine, thank you. That's referred to standards. Motion 3, Councillor Eden again. Your motion for motion 3, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Right, so I'm very keen that we get more transparency for the public in terms of what happens after an application has gone into planning. Because we all know that what happens, the application goes in, it's passed, and then somehow all sorts of variations seem to occur. And those variations don't seem to come back to planning, and they don't have any scrutiny. And I think the public have a right to see a due process over a situation where, for example, a developer has promised a certain number of affordable homes or street art or various aspects of their development, which suddenly magically don't happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, I think what we can do about it as a start is make sure people know what's happening. So I'm proposing that we require developers to come back to planning and actually explain and propose any variations they are seeking to achieve.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor? Yeah.
I'm happy to second that.
Okay,
proposal.
thank you very much. Now, councillors, are we happy to refer this to Procedures Committee for discussion? Are you happy with that, Councillor Eden? Or do you want this debated? 2/3.
Again, I love a good debate, but I can see people are a bit jaded, and yes, referring back is absolutely fine.
Right.
Thank you.
We have a proposer and seconder to refer it to Procedures. Councillor Russell?
The question of viability, because that is one of the things that does come forward when developers want to change things mid permission and development. They complain about lack of viability. So that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Are you happy? Yes, nod of head. I think that's quite happy. So with that slight amendment, are we all happy that this goes back to Procedures? Those. Councillor Connett. Microphone.
Chairman, the motion as set out is being accepted, and it's a procedural matter, which, you know, in terms of bringing forward changes back to planning. So that's a Procedures Committee. Viability is a separate matter altogether and is not within the competence of the Procedures Committee to advise on. And in my view, if there is a view about viability, that ought to be the matter of a separate motion on a different day, if that's the issue, or if it can't be dealt with through the Planning Committee process. But my advice to councillors and to Councillor Eden would be not to accept the addition of viability. It's not within the competence of procedures to deal with it.
Okay. Are you with that, Councillor Russell? Just bear with the microphone.
Once a planning permission has been given, then suddenly issues of viability do rear their heads within that. And for instance, can I take out the requirement to provide a little parade of shops or provide a residential home? All these sort of things tend to come, and they are put towards being non-viable if a developer has to do that. So I disagree with Alan here, because it does raise its head, viability. Okay. And that is taken as a reason for not proceeding with parts of a development.
Okay. Councillor McGregor?
I'll keep this as brief as possible. You know, and like with Councillor Russell, not often agreeing with Councillor Eden, I think this is possibly a first. I believe that viability is an important issue. I would, however, potentially look at it in a slightly different way. Viability is supposed to be assessed by the planning officers before a planning application comes to committee. That's according to the gov.uk website. The element of viability that then comes back in is going to be handled through the variation coming to planning committee if it's passed at procedures and then passed by full council. It would that explanation of why it's suddenly no longer viable when the planning application should have been viable when it was passed anyway. And I think, you know, the intent in Councillor Eden's motion is not to question the decision of the planning officer in granting or not granting condition change, but to actually have it explained to the public so that it is completely transparent. That is something that Councillor Gordon Hook, when he was leader and took up the leadership of the administration, promised the people of Teignbridge. And I think it's really upon us as a council, as an executive, as a planning committee, to ensure that we are as transparent as we possibly can be within the guidelines of the law. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Haynes.
Just to point out, Chairman, that viability is mentioned in the motion. It's at the sort of penultimate line, top of page 7. So it is to be considered when this is referred back.
Okay, so the motion is as it stands. Viability is already there. And you're happy with that, Councillor Russell? Yes, that's right. Okay, well, we will go to the vote on that it is referred to procedures then. All those in favour? Okay. Against? Abstentions? None. So that is referred to procedures. Right, Councillor Connett is now presenting motion 4.
Thank you, Chairman. I formally move as set out and ask for reference to the Executive for further consideration and recommendation back to Council. Thank you.
Well, that's straightforward. I will second that. All those in favour? Okay. Against? Abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. We're nearly there, councillors. We're now on item 11, which is basically for information. I presume you've all read it. It was just about the decarbonisation of the Broadmeadow Sports Centre at Teignmouth and the urgent decision why this was taken in July. Just for note, Councillor Russell? Agreed. Thank you. Right, thank you very much. Councillors, officers, thank you very much for a long meeting. We've come to the end, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.